Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I think we have everybody assembled for our meeting tonight. As we call the meeting to order, this is a special council meeting which will resolve into committee of the whole and then back to council for July 17th. I just want to acknowledge that we're having this meeting on the traditional territories of the Coast and Straits Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and their historic connections to these lands continue to this day. I just also want to point out that we have one councillor who is unable to join us tonight. She's had an injury yesterday that's preventing her from attending either here or in person. But we wish her a speedy recovery, and we do expect her back here with us next week. That's Councillor Braithwaite. I also want to just thank Councillor Appleton, who came all the way in from Salt Spring to be part of our meeting here in person today. So thank you for that. Up first, we have approval of the agenda for July 17th. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Just point out there were late-ish changes around noon today, just to add a couple of items and add all the communications. Council's read them, but for members of the public, those changes were made. Mayor's remarks will be fairly brief today. I just want to congratulate the Jeux de la Francophonie, or the Francophonie Games, which just concluded a very successful week here in Oak Bay. Well, Oak Bay, Salish, and Victoria. They had a whole roster of cultural and artistic and athletic events for youth from Western and Northern Canada. I wanted to just express our appreciation that we had 3 provincial ministers, including our MLA Minister Rankin, who attended the opening session here in Oak Bay. And the games concluded with their closing ceremonies at Willows Park on Saturday. A couple of people I'd just like to comment on. One, Councillor Braithwaite was, I think, side assigned to help pull that together about 7 years ago, and through multiple changes and delays through COVID and everything else, has stuck with it. And so I just want to express my appreciation to her. She was always there to resolve any little issues that came up. Also, the district itself was a big sponsor, but also Oak Bay Tourism, Oak Bay High, and Oak Bay Beach Hotel were really important partners to bring that all together. It became a very nice little community event. I want to just let council know that at Wednesday's meeting last week, the CRD did approve changes, preliminary changes to the establishing bylaw for the Royal McPherson Theatre Society. Those are changes that allow for variation. Right now it's essentially a fixed fee, so it'll allow for both changes to the funding model if so desired, but also some flexibility and some potential participants in that service as well, because currently the Royal Theatre is owned by Salish, Oak Bay, and Victoria, and so we would ideally like to have some other partners in that service at some point in the future. And just for the public, as council meetings are winding down for August break, I just want to encourage everybody to attend all of them. One of the many events that are going on in our community. We have night markets once a month. We have yoga in the park every Tuesday at Willows. We have free concerts going on, arts events, and a lot happening. Specifically this week, we have both the Jaguars in the Park car gathering on Saturday and Oak Bay Avenue Classic Car Show happening on Sunday. So those are 2 big events coming up in our community. And with that, we are going to, so this is kind of a funny structure of the meeting, just so people understand what we're doing right now. We have, because we have some items that council has to make some decisions on later in the meeting, we are gathering as a council, because council is our legislative hat that we wear that allows us to pass laws, bylaws, etc. However, we have essentially a one-issue agenda that allows us some time, and so we have a structure called Committee of the Whole, where all of council sits as a committee. So we're not sitting as a legislative body. It's a bit more informal. Our rules of procedure are a bit more relaxed, and we have more chance to talk about things with the community. So we're going to resolve now into Committee of the Whole. We're going to deal with the one issue, and then we're going to come back to council and deal with a number of more of the procedural and legislative responsibilities that we have. So trust us, we know what we're doing on this one, I guess, is all I can say. Item number 3.1, I just need a motion to resolve to Committee of the Whole as council. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Often for council, I wear a chain of office to show us more formal, often take off the tie for Committee of the Whole, but we're not going to go through the procedures today. So item number 4 on our consolidated agenda is approval of the Committee of the Whole agenda, which is in front of us now. Can I have a motion to approve that agenda? Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, that carries. We have 2 minutes from 2 committees of the whole, one on June 19th and one on July 10th. So I just look for a motion to adopt those 2 minutes.
Move adoption.
Second. Is there any changes or corrections to those minutes that people would like to see? Not seeing any. All those in favor. Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We have one delegation tonight as part of our open, and I see I believe they are attending online. We have the Ambulance Paramedics of British Columbia, CUPE Local 873. I believe we have Mr. Clifford. I think that the procedure here is the same online as it would be in person. If you could state your name, your organization, and where you're joining us from, I will start the 5-minute timer. We have a maximum in our procedure bylaw of 5 minutes. You can take up to that amount, but you don't have to use it all if you don't want to. Do you have a presentation that you wish to share?
Just a follow-up. It'll be a verbal. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. So why don't I welcome you to the meeting then? I believe it's Mr. Clifford. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right, well,
my name's Troy Clifford. I'm the Provincial President with the Ambulance Paramedics and Emergency Dispatchers of BC, I'm proud to confirm that the Ambulance Paramedics and Emergency Dispatchers of BC, CUPE Local 873, are honored to deliver care and services in the province of BC. So tonight is just to have a conversation, and I'll follow up with some additional more formal packages or questions if there's anything to follow up. So really, this is a follow-up to many discussions we've had with communities across the province, and it's really about engagement and who we are and why we would be talking to municipal governments. And so we represent 4,500 paramedics and dispatchers across BC, so every community, Victoria, Oak Bay, right to Atlan. And that's so we're a provincial service in every community. And what I just like to give a little history of where we are and who we are. Well, so we're the ambulance service that provides services in dispatch and ambulance services in all levels in every community. And we're under the British Columbia Ambulance Service, BCEHS, which is Emergency Health Services, which is under Provincial Health Service Authority, which is within the Ministry of Health. So a provincial entity. And then what we also do is that we're very unique in when it comes to a health discipline, is that we are designated federally as a public safety occupation, but we're also a provincial health profession. So what that means is that we simultaneously transition between, so we're designated as a public safety occupation, just like police and fire and our partners in the communities in public safety. But we're also clinically and care-wise, we're linked to our health challenges. The other interesting thing about the ambulance paramedics, which is why I'm here talking to you, or one of the reasons we're talking to you as a local government, is that we're the union, the traditional union that represents paramedics and dispatchers in BC, and we do all the normal things that a union does, negotiates and collective agreements and labor relations and labor code responsibilities. But in BC, we're unique. We're the BC chapter of the Paramedic Association of Canada. And what that means is we're the lobbyists for the professional voice of paramedics and our patients in BC. And the Paramedic Association has chapters in every province, but in BC, we do the dual role. So that's why you see us engaging on public safety, why you see us engaging on service delivery, expanded scope, because quite frankly, that's how paramedics identify. They want to have more skills to treat their patients. We want more services for our communities. And that's why the engagement of governments at all levels, the communities and that. So that's really what opening up this conversation. So really, why would we have any engagement of local government? Well, 4 years ago, when I took on this role as president, I realized our relationship with municipalities and governments and local communities wasn't the best it could be. So I took on a challenge to try and meet and to have open up conversations with communities, because it's not unique. It doesn't matter where you are in the province. The challenges we all face with homelessness, addiction, mental health, service delivery, access to physicians and community primary health care teams. They're not. Addiction and mental health is it shows no boundaries, whether you're demographics or which community. It's not a downtown east side thing. We see it in every community, every home. And I don't think any one of us can say that mental health or addiction and the challenges we face has not impacted our lives, or we've seen the impacts of it. And I think that's really, these are the kind of awareness. But the other thing that's really key is that 2 years ago, we experienced a heat dome in BC, and it really called into question the responses of the ambulance service. And the Minister of Health announced a number of changes, and that included one of many of those changes was the ability to do urban response times review. And we're seeing increased call volumes of about 6% every year on average across BC. And in other communities, we're seeing it higher, obviously. And in Victoria, or Greater Victoria, which you're part of, we see increased call volumes. And that's putting pressures on that. That's why you're hearing in the news of delays and that. And we really need to get that review done. So what we want to do is work with the local government to ensure that review's done, and that we can provide those services in communities, things like urban community paramedics that can support our communities, the primary healthcare teams, where we're talking about these cars that you just seen an announcement by the government today in communities
Clifford,
having these.
we're down to about the last 10 or 15 seconds. If maybe you could just wrap up the presentation.
Yeah, so I can open up to questions, but really it's about engagement with the communities and opening up you have access to us. And we work very well with BCHS and the government, and we just want to continue those discussions and hopefully meet you all at UBCM this year and continue these discussions. So I'm available for any questions if you wish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clifford. And by all means, feel free, if you want to send around some of that information by email, you can send it to obcouncil@oakbay.ca or to the administration, and it'll circulate to us as well.
Absolutely.
Are there any questions at this point for the delegation? Okay, I think we will be seeing you at UBCM then.
Yeah, and I'll send you over the stuff. And it's a lot for a short presentation, but it's really about opening up conversation. No, your council has my contact, so if anybody has a follow-up question or anything, they can feel free to contact us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clifford. Enjoy the summer evening. Take care.
Bye-bye.
We now move to mayor and council. It's really just council verbal reports because I've already given my mayor's remarks. This is just a chance at committee of the whole that we use just to give people a chance, members of council, just to update other members of council, some of the work going on of things that might be of interest happening in the community. Not every month everybody has something, but there's usually a couple of things going on, and the public is always quite interested in some of the many hours and hours of work that our council always puts into some of these other committees around the region. I do want to let you know, if you're watching this through the YouTube stream, it's usually about a minute or so delayed, and so if you do want to speak in the public participation period, which is coming up next, that's for items that are not on the agenda. So if you're going to talk to us about the active transportation plans, those sorts of things, that's going to come a little bit later in a few minutes. But we always at every meeting just provide time for anybody who wishes to address council on matters of interest that aren't on the agenda but might be of interest to the community. So if you're doing that, please go enter through the application or call into the number and raise your hand so that we can see that when we conclude the council verbal reports portion of it, because I don't think this is going to take a very long time. I'm going to probably start on this side if that's okay. Councillor Patterson, I'm going to provide a brief update.
Yeah, I don't have any updates because there's been no real formal committee liaison work for me. And I attended many events with other council members and alone, but I'm not going to go into them because there's been quite a long list, and so I don't have anything to report.
That's fine. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Last few weeks I attended the Heritage Commission meeting where the committee reviewed the Uplands street lighting, as well as they had a really interesting discussion around the webinar on accessibility resources in heritage buildings. At the Arts Commission meeting, we continue our strategic planning, and I just wanted to share the vision statement. Formerly was the arts are central to life in the region. And we're looking at the arts are key drivers of community vitality, economic sustainability, and quality of life as a more proactive take. And We approved our idea grant recommendations at that meeting. I also attended the CRD climate workshop on carbon and climate budgeting, and just highlighted the importance of calculating more based on detailed design as opposed to really, it's challenging to calculate carbon when you don't yet have a design to calculate. So that was an interesting takeaway, and really enjoyed the Pride Parade and festival. Just absolutely fantastic event. So many great conversations.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I'll be brief. The Greater Victoria Public Library Board met on June the 27th. I was actually not able to attend and chair the meeting as I typically would, so Vice Chair Shahir Kher chaired that meeting and probably did a better job than I would normally do. I guess the main piece of information coming out of that Council and the public should be aware of is that the Greater Victoria Public Library's 2-year strategic bridging plan, which was put in place essentially very much in response to COVID, and that 2-year shorter term strategic plan that would normally be 5 years or longer for the library board, is actually coming up. It will expire in October of this year. The library board elected to extend that until the end of the calendar year to give the board a little bit more time for strategic thought and strategic process to determine the next stages of their strategic planning process. So that's underway. Also, the library is beginning a very detailed and very significant review of their intellectual freedom policies and procedures with respect to intellectual freedom and the challenges that are coming to libraries across North America, and to which the library GVPL is not impervious. So we're going to be doing some very important work with that over the course of the balance of this year. And I will also say that I was at the Heritage Foundation on July the 11th, and they are getting ready for their fall speaker series, which is going to be as good as always, and shaping up really nicely. And of course, just to remind council and members of the public that the Heritage Foundation has a booth at the night market, at the Oak Bay Night Market, which is always really, really well attended, and they have newly printed materials and new stuff to give you if you want to go and check it out. But always knowledgeable people staffing that booth, and I encourage council and members of the public to go by and ask questions. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just very briefly, in addition to committees that I'm appointed to, I've attended advisory design planning meetings since our last report out. Also, South Island Prosperity Partnership, where I have also been appointed to a planning committee to help steer the delivery and content of our local government leadership day coming up in November. But the one community event that I would like to comment on, because it has been the highlight of my summer so far, was the Arts Alive tour around the community by bike and by car to see all the sculptures in place and be serenaded by the most talented young opera singers. It was a beautiful evening, and I just want to say a great shout out to our Parks, Rec and Culture staff, who did an absolutely fabulous job of organizing that and making it a very special community event. And I hope we see 3 times as many people when we do it next year. I mean, there was many people there, but it was really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. That has evolved every year and gotten better every year, so I'm sure it'll keep drawing more people. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Thank you very much. Just briefly, I'll add my voice to Councillor Watson's voice. The Arts Alive tour was amazing, and it was really wonderful, and staff were amazing too in putting it together. But I also want to shout out to the driver, Dan, of the little bus that took some of us around who are not able to walk all that distance. He was amazing. He was incredibly helpful to all of us that were on the bus, and I was really impressed with his care and concern. Really enjoyed the Pride Parade with my colleagues. That was great fun, and it was uplifting. The crowds, by my estimation, were huge. They lined both sides of the route, probably 5 deep or more, and it was great. Honestly, it was uplifting. And I just want to shout out also to the Tourism Committee, whose new member, Tony Joe, has been instrumental in putting together the car show for Sunday. This is the classic and, well, everything car show on the Avenue on Sunday, July the 23rd, I believe. And am I right on the date? I think so. Yeah, it's Sunday anyway. And the day before, as you had mentioned earlier, is the Jaguar Car Show in Windsor Park. But the one on the avenue is usually huge and brings thousands of people. So I just want to thank the Tourism Committee, Tony Joe, and the other members for their work and support. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Green. That concludes those updates, and much appreciated. When we do them once a month, there's often a little bit more than we've had in the past, so that's great. We move next to the public comment and question period. So this is an opportunity for members of the public to address council on items of interest to the community, not items on the agenda, not land use items, but anything else that might be of general interest. You're more than welcome to come forward in the room here if you want to. You can stick up your hand. If you're here for the next item, the active transportation, we will have public input at that portion as well. So I'm going to call online as well. Is there anybody online who wishes to address issues not on the agenda tonight, just of interest to council? Yes, please come forward. I know you know the routine.
Mayor, Council, hello, my name is Eric Zelka. I live in North Henderson part of town. I just have some general comments to say, nothing specific, so it's not specifically about anything on the agenda, but general comments with respect to, where I see Oak Bay going. I'm very concerned with the desire to reset priorities in the sleepy time of the summer when no one's paying attention. I just got back from vacation. I'm about to leave on another vacation tomorrow, and I just happened to see that that there's a desire here to do some rather, or at least discuss and possibly move forward with RFPs on this Henderson bike lane and other bike lane aspects. That concerns me that these things are being done post-haste without a lot of input from the public. That I don't understand quite what you're doing. I think Oak Bay has much greater priorities that we really need to be paying attention to, such as our sidewalks. I do have serious concerns that with the up and down roller coaster aspects of our sidewalks, it's inappropriate for our elderly, for our walkers, for our rollers, for our strollers, for those in wheelchairs.
Or Doc
This is having to do
Mr.
with
Zelka, sorry,
yes.
just for that specific part, for the pedestrian and the cycling, you can just come back up at the next agenda item, because that is the appropriate place to talk to those pieces. If there's other things that are not related to that.
If I have time. I'm on vacation, so if I have time.
Fair
Thank
enough.
you so much. I very, very much appreciate that there is a procedures bylaw that makes it inappropriate or comfortable or difficult for the public to speak at a time where in an informal way. I'm trying to be informal, because this is committee of the whole, I understood. So I'm just doing my best to try and be informal with you. Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate your desire and council's desire to hear the public. I'm also very concerned about housing in general. I think I can talk about that in a general sense. 25% of all mortgages are for investing in new housing today, not for first-time home buyers. This desire to build is not going to solve our concern around housing. Restoring the family will actually go a long way to dealing with the housing issues. Unfortunately, in my situation is a prime example where, with unfortunately a split in the family, we now need two houses for the kids to go back and forth between two houses, which is a terrible situation. But unfortunately, that is now the standard living arrangement across Canada. That most likely is the underlying cause of this housing concern that we have. Please don't cave into the building lobbying groups, and strangely, please don't cave into the province. The only affordable housing we could build is really on our public lands. Maybe, for example, public works could be outsourced to Salish, like we do with our police, some aspects of our police, and build housing there. Or maybe the new fire hall could have housing built above it, like something similar to what they did in Sydney. I very much appreciate the time to speak with you. And please be gentle with the dollars, our dollars, that you're spending.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zelka. And then the agenda item on transportation is next, so we won't be too long if you wish to stick around and participate in that conversation. Is there anybody else that wishes to address council on items of general interest to the community? I don't see other hands up, so we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which I think most people have interest in, which is under Section 9, Draft Policies and Regulations. We have the Oak Bay 2023 Active Transportation Strategy Refresh. We have Mr. Rennick with us, our Deputy Director of Engineering and Public Works. We also have Mr. Robertson, who is our Director of Engineering and Public Works as well. But I believe, Mr. Rennick, you have you have the helm for this conversation. So why don't I hand it over to you, and just for those attending, so you understand procedurally what we do. I did say it's a bit more of an informal discussion tonight. This body will make recommendations back to council for future, but procedurally here to make sure we all understand, we're just going to give staff a chance to kind of just provide an overview of the report for those who haven't read the whole thing. Then we're going to have a chance for council to ask questions. We'll usually give people at least one kick around here just to make sure we get some clarifying questions that might help clarify the options in front of us. Then we'll go to members of the public. People can provide comments or ask questions. We'll just ask people to keep their questions about 2 or 3 minutes. I think we're going to have a number of people who wish to address us. But by all means, if you need a bit more time, you can come up for a second time to speak. And then we'll come back once the questions and comments are completed. We'll come back to this table, and then we'll have a discussion and perhaps have some more questions, have some discussion, and this body will make a recommendation out of that. So with that, Mr. Rennick, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction, Mayor Murdoch. Good evening, Council, and good evening, members of the public. In the Council Priority Plan, there is a project number T23-1. It's got a fairly long title, but I'll abbreviate it to Expedite Implementation of the Active Transportation Program. In the project backgrounder for that initiative, staff had messaged to this council that we would return with a refreshed active transportation program, and at that time we would identify a couple of top priority projects as approved by council to proceed with design. That had originally been envisioned for April of this year. However, because of operational challenges and competing priorities, we had to delay to this meeting. What we are presenting tonight is the draft of the refreshed active transportation plan. It's largely based on the 2011 active transportation strategy, which was then incorporated into the official community plan. It reviews what has been done since the 2011 active transportation strategy was completed, and it recommends a few quick win projects for us to advance to detailed design. I'm sure there are lots of questions, and so I'm keeping my introduction brief, and we, myself and Director Robertson, are happy to take questions.
Great, thank you very much. I'm happy just to go around the table at least once here and take some questions. If there's some outstanding clarification that people wish to have on the report. Councillor Smart, go ahead.
Well, thank you. My first question is just a clarification around the Lansdowne commuter route. And just in the description of it, it mentioned that it was from Cadborough Bay Road to Beach. And I just wanted to clarify, was it intended to be Foul Bay Road to Beach?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor. Yes, I believe that was an error. We checked it. When you look at the map, it looks like it goes all the way from Foul Bay to Beach. So we'll make sure that we pass on the comment to the consultant that that was just a typographical error.
Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. And one of the areas that I guess I expected to see prioritized was Foul Bay from Oak Bay Ave to Fort. And I wondered if you could just comment on the Oak Bay's ownership of that stretch and whether or not it was considered for a priority in this.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor. In that part of town, the municipal boundary runs along the curb line of Foul Bay Road, and so that makes Foul Bay Road a boundary highway, which means that any changes to that highway need to be done in concert with our partners in the city of Victoria. For example, the portion of bike lanes that were installed this year between Goldsmith Street and actually I think it goes all the way to Bourchier in City of Victoria and Cadborough Bay Road, that design was developed in conjunction with City of Victoria. So because that's a boundary highway and because the road is very narrow and there are some trade-offs that will have to be made in order to deliver bike lanes on that stretch, that's why it was not one of the low-hanging fruit, if you will.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Could you comment, I guess, similarly, I'm guessing it's similar issues, the very southern end of Foul Bay Road, it was just unclear to me, again, whether that is on Oak Bay's property, or if the whole right-of-way on Lower Foul Bay is, again, City of Victoria.
You're speaking about between Oak Bay Avenue and Richardson?
No, quite lower, so south of Fairfield.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, the vast majority of the Foul Bay Road right-of-way south of Fairfield Road is entirely in City of Victoria. There's a small laneway, and the musical theater people are going to get mad at me if I say it wrong. I think it's Quixote Lane. That's in Victoria. Basically, south of that laneway is where our border starts again, and Foul Bay Road is half in Oak Bay and half in Victoria. So it's really only a couple hundred meters north of Crescent. The overwhelming majority of Foul Bay Road south of Fairfield is entirely in Victoria, not a boundary highway.
Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Just one more question. I'll give other people some time to ask questions. I just wanted to know, with the Upper Henderson Road and Cedar Hill that came to council for a motion at the end of February, some of the comments around the table when that motion was defeated were that, well, we're interested in this, but as part of the active transportation strategy. And I don't see that it's sort of been pulled out as a quick win. So I just wondered if you could just comment on why staff did not sort of pick it out as a quick win at this time.
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, the 2011 active transportation strategy had recommended removing the time restriction and just having those bike lanes be in place 24/7. That recommendation was copied into Appendix A of the report that was attached to this staff report. However, it was not identified as a quick win project because the intent of the quick win projects was projects that we could design, that we could advance for grant funding. You don't need grant funding. That's entirely a policy decision. And so we would leave that basically in council's realm to make that policy discussion.
Okay. Are there other questions from members of council? Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mayor, through you to Director or Assistant Director Rennick. Councillor Smart asked all but one of my questions, and it was just a clarification about the Henderson Road bikeway and what is actually expected. I didn't quite follow either the description in the report or the maps, but it is what's being proposed for, priorities, just the stretch that starts at Cadbury Bay Road and goes as far as not even Carnarvon Park? Or is it actually the whole stretch all the way up from that point through the little snickets and up to at least Lansdowne Road? So if you could just clarify that.
Go ahead, Mr. Rennick.
Through you, Mayor, the Henderson Road neighborhood bikeway would actually start at Oak Bay Avenue and Elgin. It would use Elgin Road right-of-way, then the multi-user pathway that goes by the Public Works Yard. We would need to determine how exactly we would connect cyclists onto the other side of Cadbro Bay Road, how the path would snake around the rec center and the high school property. It would then follow the Henderson Road right-of-way, which in some places is a laneway and in some places is very narrow walking trails. Those would need to be enhanced to a multi-user pathway. Then I believe once you're north of Newton Street, it's an actual road with where we would need to look at traffic calming to achieve neighborhood bikeway status. And finally, getting bikes across Lansdowne Road onto the portion of Henderson where it, before it merges with Foul Bay Road and connects to the existing painted bike lanes. So it would actually be a quite significant route.
Thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Rennick, go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you for Mr. Rennick. In the report, for the proposed section between Haltane and Carrick, where it's an unusual, it's really, I think, over the years developed in kind of into a walking trail. And as the report points out, it's difficult. There's quite a few encroachments there. Do we know what the average width is to that section right now, and if we don't go forward with widening it, which I realize would be quite a bit of work for and affect residences within that area, but if we don't undertake that now, how would we be limited in the future?
Mr. Rennick.
Through you, Mayor, I don't have an average width. There are portions of that trail that can't be more than 1.5 meters wide. It would be wholly inappropriate to be shared by pedestrians and cyclists. It's just too narrow. There's also what they call maze gates, where it meets the road. That's where you have the 2 offset fences that cyclists basically have to dismount to get around. So in its current form, it's not appropriate to be used by cyclists. In terms of, do we have enough right-of-way? That is the district's land. We do own it. The longer we go without asserting our rights to it, the more established some of that planting gets, and the more difficult it gets if you go to someone and say, well, your hedge needs to be trimmed to accommodate a pathway. So it is our land. We have lots of width there. It's just a question of what do we do with that width? Do we widen the path or not?
Anything else, Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for that information. I think it answers what my understanding was in reading the report. Also, in the report, where you have the project on McNeil Avenue, one of the items, not for cycling, but for pedestrian mobility, it does indicate that tactile mats would be, the recommendation is to install tactile mats to indicate where crossing is safe for those with visual impairments. There are a number of areas in Oak Bay where it is particularly difficult for those with visual impairments because we don't have the same sound activated directives for those who are visually impaired. So in this project, would we also undertake some sort of an audio signaling to indicate not only where they're safe to cross, but when it's safe to cross?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, looking at accessibility for the visually impaired is out of the scope of this particular report. However, we did recently complete an accessibility survey, and we also have dealt with accessibility for the visually impaired on an ad hoc basis when we're contacted about particular concerns. So, for example, the traffic light at Elgin Road and Oak Bay Avenue recently had an audible installed a couple of months ago, and that was directly in response to a resident reached out to the engineering department, and we just made it happen as an operational decision. So we could certainly discuss having broader policies around where do we do tactile mats and where do we do audible warning signals, but a lot of these one-off situations are just dealt with operationally.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I saw a hand over here, I think. Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. I guess, and I appreciate this material coming forward. I guess I have some sort of broader concepts about what's been presented here. I guess in terms of terminology, it's sort of being captured as a refresh, but I guess I would see it as being a sort of more targeted list of some priorities for action. The consultant has laid out a certain number of projects that they would see as being taken on in a priority sequence, but I think it's important to convey that the refresh of the quote-unquote refresh of the active transportation plan doesn't set aside components that were laid out in the 2011 plan. I don't see anything in the 2023 material that seeks to set aside or otherwise exclude anything that's in the 2011 plan. So just from staff's perspective, do I have that right? I mean, I'm proceeding forward with the idea that the basic network and the layout that is in the 2011 report is still valid. The 2023 report doesn't speak to it directly. So I'm just wanting clarification on that.
Mr. Rennick, has there been anything removed?
Through you, Mayor, no, Councillor Appleton, you are correct. The 2011 report, which was also adopted into the official community plan, it's not an intention by this report to replace it. It's simply to focus it. The 2011 report gave us more projects than we conceivably could have done. And so the intent of the refresh was, it's almost less a refresh and more of a reframe of what are the priorities that we can advance for quicker implementation and for grant funding.
Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate that. I'm kind of wanting to sort of explore the idea of the AAA network. I think probably one of the most significant components since the 2011 report was issued was sort of basically the general understanding that new infrastructure should always be built to the AAA standard unless there's some sort of significant exigency that specifies otherwise. So, but I know that there's reference made in the 2023 report referencing that adjacent municipalities are building to a AAA standard, but doesn't specifically reference the AAA standard when proposed designs and the proposed priorities that are laid out in this report are here. So is what is built into here implying that it is built to a AAA standard, or will council need to go further and specify that all new infrastructure should be built to that AAA standard? And what standard would be used? Because I understand CRD standard is the current standard. It's just not explored very much in the report.
And Mr. Rannick, there's two, I think, identified in here, specifically Lansdowne and Haltane, but perhaps you can just, Councillor Appleton's question there.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Through you. I have kind of a long answer for this one because I thought I might be asked about AAA, so I did prepare a little bit. So the province of British Columbia in 2019 published active transportation design guidelines, and that is the standard that they use when they are handing out the associated infrastructure grant program. And when you look through the active transportation design guidelines, there's basically two forms of AAA bike lanes that they recognize. One is what's called a neighborhood bikeway. And a neighborhood bikeway is where cars and bikes share the street, but it's not just any shared street. There's a specific requirement for vehicle speeds of 30 kilometers per hour and traffic of less than 1,000 vehicles per day. An example of that would be Vancouver Street in City of Victoria, or Richardson Street, for example, where they put in speed humps, they put in diverters at the intersections, basically to lower vehicle traffic. So that's one form of AAA under the province's guidelines. The other form of AAA would be physical separation in the form of curbs or other barriers, and that would be your Fort Street, your Saanich, I believe Shelburne in Saanich would be that form of AAA. So many of the routes that our active transportation strategy recommended for bike lanes are on roads that are designated in our official community plan as collectors. And collector roads are designed to carry moderate amounts of traffic between local roads and larger, higher priority roads, which are called arterials. For example, McNeil Avenue is an OCP designated collector, and it's slated in the active transportation strategy as a commuter route. The last time we did vehicle counts on McNeil Avenue on the western portion going up the hill, it was about 4,500 vehicles per day. So that's well in excess of that 1,000 vehicle per day in order to qualify as a AAA neighborhood bikeway. So if you were going to try to turn a road like that into a AAA neighborhood bikeway, you would need to amend the official community plan, remove the collector designation, lower the speed limit, and construct traffic calming to lower vehicle volumes. You would also then need to be prepared for those 3,500 vehicles per day that were taking McNeil. Where do they end up now, and what are the impacts? The alternative would be that if you wanted to do AAA bike lanes on collectors and preserve their collector status, you would need to do physical separation between drivers and cyclists. Now, City of Victoria had a lot of roads where there were 2 lanes of travel, and they made the decision to take away a travel lane and turn it into a bike lane. Of course, Oak Bay does not have any roads that have 2 lanes of travel in the same direction. So if we look at how do we fit a protected bike lane within an existing roadway, we're typically looking at taking away parking if it's wide enough. If it's not wide enough, then we're looking at, do we actually have to move the sidewalks? Move the sidewalks, move the curbs, move the streetlights, move the power poles, which then means less green space in the roadway. Unfortunately, these would be the trade-offs. And now the follow-up question or the follow-up response, when Councillor Appleton asked, would we want direction to produce specifically AAA bike lanes, what we had suggested might make sense is that when each of these particular bike lane projects comes forward to council to look into the details, as you will with McNeil next week, we would be able to tell you at that time, does this design qualify as AAA, yes or no? What would be the implications to achieve AAA design? So for example, would you need to move the road? How much more or move the curb? How much more would that cost? Would trees be impacted? Would parking be impacted? So we feel that just given how narrow the roads are in Oak Bay, rather than targeting AAA across the board, it would make more sense to look at it on a case-by-case basis because there will be trade-offs on every single project. I'm sorry, that was really long-winded.
I'd rather have a full answer than a quick one. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton. That's good. Okay. Yep, no worries. Any other questions? Councillor Green?
Thank you very much, and through you to Mr. Rennick. Are you building public consultation into each of the recommendations? I'm thinking particularly of the North Henderson area. There is an active North Henderson Community Association as well as residents, of course, should changes be made on that route. So I'm just wondering, what is the public engagement or public consultation model you would like to see used as well? Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Rennick.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Really, the public consultation model would be as directed. We could build it into every project. We could have them on agendas. We could put it up on Connect Oak Bay. I think that's really something that council could direct us on what council would like to see.
Thanks very much.
To be clear, this is a strategy, so each of the individual projects would come here, and if there's additional consultation, that would be potential at that point. Mr. Rennick?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. For example, with McNeil, we came to committee of the whole last year with McNeil and presented options. We discussed at that time, council made some direction. That project then comes back, it's coming back in a week for council to look at the detailed design and make the recommendation to go to make a grant application if that's what council so chooses. So that's certainly a model that we could look at. Right now, we would be getting the direction from this council to go and design some of the quick win projects. We would still have to come back with them. There would still be touch points. And as we further move on the implementation plan, there would be further touch points with this council where we present you the options. We ask, how would you like to engage the community on each project?
And just anything else, Councillor Green? So I'll use my slot here to ask a couple of questions as well. So the first one is a follow-up to that. In that, just for my clarification, what we're looking at here today for consideration is essentially a refresh version of a strategy. If we approve this strategy or approve it with some changes, that essentially sets the direction. It says, yes, we actually are moving down the path to implementing these consolidated bike routes. And I know we've had a strategic priority of completing these this term, or if it's possible. So that's, at this point, what's in front of us today is essentially the go forward state with that. Is that a fair statement? And obviously the specific projects we can determine consultation, but this is an important step for us right now in terms of public input and consideration.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. It's both a go forward on the broader strategy and with the staff recommendation, it's also go forward on design on those two specific projects, the Henderson Road Neighborhood Bikeway and the Haltane Estevan Neighborhood Bikeway.
Great, thank you. And can you remind us what public consultation was undertaken in 2011? Do we have a record of what actual public consultation was done in the creation of the original plan?
Unfortunately, we were unable to find significant records of the public consultation that was involved in the 2011 plan. We do know that there was an active transportation committee that was struck around that time. We also know that the 2011 plan was incorporated in the official community plan. And of course, the official community plan had significant public consultation in the form of open houses and a survey that was responded to by 2,500 respondents. So we don't have the record necessarily of the consultation that went into the 2011 plan, but there were many opportunities for the public to have requested changes to that plan after it was adopted, prior to it being adopted into the OCP.
Okay, thank you for that. The other thing, in looking at this strategy, it's not clear to me what, how bike parking is sort of part of the strategy. So can you just touch a little bit on how much of this touches on, because parking becomes a major issue if you don't have destination places to store bikes. It becomes harder for people to use them.
Yes, so end of trip facilities is something that is eligible for grant funding under the BC Active Transportation Infrastructure Grant Program. This particular report does not address end of trip facilities. It's certainly something that we could incorporate, that we could speak to the consultant about. Could you identify, one in the village or enhancements to the one at Oak Bay Recreation? That's certainly something that, if there's a willingness for that from council, we could direct the consultant accordingly.
Procedurally here, if there's changes like that to be made to this report, my understanding is we would just essentially make motions to ask staff to bring back some of those options within a revised plan, and that would come back for council. But we can still move forward with some of the other directions at the same time. Is that accurate, Mr. Rennick?
Yes, Your Worship. The first staff recommendation is that the refreshed active transportation strategy be endorsed as presented or endorsed as amended as follows. List specific alterations here. So,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
Thank you for that. And the other question I had was just in terms of particularly the AAA I'm looking at specifically along Lansdowne, where it does make sense, but also could be a very complicated and expensive portion of that. I wasn't clear in the plan. Does this allow for, say, interim stages? So if we said, okay, we can put in painted bike lanes for now, and then when a grant comes along and we are undertaking another infrastructure project, we can then at that point do an upgrade. Is that contemplation allowed within this kind of strategy, or are we kind of bound if we approve this to sort of say we're not doing anything until we reach this strategic endpoint?
Ultimately, we can do phased projects if that's the desire of the council. I would caution that we're unlikely to receive any grant funding for the first phase of a phased project. And so there would be the concern of if we're going to approach a project in a phased program, that kind of that early implementation phase is being done entirely out of our own budget. And then whatever the final project is, that's when we're able to apply for the grants. But that's certainly an option.
Thank you. And my last question on this one is just, I wasn't clear. There was it's identified as one of the projects, but not one of the quick wins, is that little stretch from Cadbro Bay between Bowker and Estevan. And given that we're making the connection to Estevan, and we have quite a bit of desire for connections to the school and those commercial areas, are there some constraints of that road that made the consultant believe that it would be difficult to do a quick win in that little stretch? Through me to you, Mr. Rennick.
Yeah, sorry. I can never tell if we're supposed to do that at committee of the whole or not. There were some studies that the district engineering department had commissioned probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point about the feasibility of extending those bike lanes further north. And the road does narrow when it gets north of Bowker, so it's just the usual trade-off between on-street parking, access to the businesses. For example, you've got the little strip mall that has the liquor store and the ice cream place. How does that play in? So I just think that one's not maybe as straightforward as the ones that were identified as quick wins.
Thank you for that explanation. I think it's probably worthwhile for us to allow members of the public to address us at this point, and then we can come back to this table and start refining some of the pieces here. So if there's any members of the public in person or online that wish to address council, I'm assuming there's at least one person here today that would like to. If you're online, if you could just use their reactions piece at the bottom of the Zoom and use it to raise hand, and I'll just alternate between people in person and people at home. Please come forward. And as you're coming forward, I'll just share a little story with you as well. This is, we just recently finished this desk that you're sitting at. This is actually Tommy Douglas's constituency desk when he was the premier of Saskatchewan. So found its way to Oak Bay through a very circuitous route, but there you go. It's fulfilling its desired life in public realm. So the process here, sorry, is just that if you just state your name, municipality, and residence.
Okay, my name is Paul Rasmussen, and I live on Dalhousie Street in Oak Bay, and I'm speaking as someone who lives in Oak Bay and does almost everything by bike. And I guess a concern that I have that doesn't seem to be addressed much of anywhere is the intersection of Haltane and Foul Bay, and that's a really important intersection for biking because it connects to the Haltane corridor, which is a really important bikeway that I think lots of bicyclists, including me, use all the time. And the situation there is really bike unfriendly because you have to if there's a lot of traffic on Foul Bay, which there often is, you have to like ride your bike over to a light, push the button, and cross the street, and a lot of bicyclists.
Why don't you wait there for a second? We'll just ask the question, because when I read the report, I read that improvement of that corridor as addressing that crossing as well. Is that the case, Mr. Rennick?
Yes, we've had some preliminary discussions with District of Saanich about enhancing that crossing because that is a boundary highway. But one thing that I will note is that District of Saanich and City of Victoria have recently adopted the Elephant's Feet cross bike. That's not currently in Oak Bay's bylaws, so if we were to facilitate a cross bike, there would need to be some minor bylaw amendments, so just putting that on the radar. But yes, it has been a discussion point between us and Saanich, enhancing that crossing.
I guess to me that would be like a
You
lot
can
more.
keep talking to me.
Okay,
So.
that would be a lot more important than putting Sharrows on Haltane and Estevan, and I think I would guess that most bicyclists would agree with me. Thank you. It's great to see active transportation on the agenda, though. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Rasmussen. I'm just going to point out, too, I was going to say this earlier, and Mr. Rasmussen, you did a perfect job of demonstrating this, but we had at the last meeting, no, it's fine, you can leave. You can, turn off the button. At the last meeting, we had a very rare occurrence of a public speaker getting angry and speaking loudly and then not giving up the microphone to other people. So you demonstrated beautifully how we want things to do. Come up, introduce yourselves, just stay on topic, ask questions. We're here to have a conversation. We may have some people with different opinions here. My experience has been the community is always trying to find the best path forward. So we'll just work with the assumption that people are here with good intentions and speak respectfully. So thanks for being a good example of that one, and we'll continue that tradition here tonight. We have Mr. Taddy online. Perhaps you can go next.
Can you hear me okay, Mayor?
We can. And welcome to the meeting.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Council for moving this agenda item forward. I know it's summertime and I appreciate the effort Council's making. We have such a deficit in this regard over so many years. And I also appreciate the staff explanations of the trade-offs on each route. I just want to remind Council, and McNeil next week is a good example of it. When you're looking at specific projects and the trade-offs, I really want Council to get as close to AAA as possible. I want to remind Council that it's all about safety, the environment, and accessibility for all ages and abilities. Veteran cyclists like myself and other people who've spoken, we feel unsafe, but we still go out. But the dramatic increase you see in all ages and abilities on protected bike lanes is where we want to go. So when you're looking at these trade-offs, I'd like you to just remind yourselves that one of the reasons we're dealing with this deadline and this shortfall of funds is because you've deferred it for 10 or 12 years. So let's start putting money into our budgets. Let's not just rely on grants. And let's move as close as possible to AAA, even if we can't get there in any specific project. Please keep that in mind. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taddy. Anybody else in person? Yeah, please come forward. We don't actually have a time limit on people, like total amount of time for public input. So we just ask each person to try and stick to 2 or 3 minutes, and that will give us everybody time.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi. My name's Matt. I live in Victoria on Emerson, so I'm just over the border by, just past Richmond. I grew up in Oak Bay. Biked to school along McNeil as a kid, and it was pretty sketchy. I don't think I would want my kid to do that, as it was then or now. But one of my big issues with biking, into Oak Bay, as was already talked about with the Foul Bay crossing, is getting across Oak Bay Ave between Foul Bay and Richmond. It's like anywhere that you try to get across, you're making a left turn, like onto or off of Oak Bay Ave, like anywhere. And I know that's kind of just the alignment of the streets, but yeah, I think that just makes Oak Bay Ave just such a huge barrier to getting anywhere. And like you can get into these nice little bikeways. I know that section is like that city of Victoria, but Oak Bay, trying to come up with other ways of getting bikes across Oak Bay Ave, and I know that's probably on your radar, but yeah.
Good. That's great. Thank you, Matt. Could we actually get a last name for the minutes? Is that
My last name is Bullock.
Bullock? Thank you. Please come forward. At this point, there's nobody else online. We have a number of people in the audience who wish to speak, but if anybody online does wish to speak, you can raise your hand now, and I will go to you. Welcome. You know the routine now. Name and resident municipality of residence, please.
Hi, my name is Maggie Knight. I'm a resident of Oak Bay, down by Lafayette Park. I have lots of things to say, so you'll probably need to cut me off, and I'll come back for a second turn. But I'm here to speak in favor of giving biking families safe access to local schools and community amenities. I wasn't a major cyclist before the pandemic made transit feel unsafe, but I now bike regularly with my 3-year-old on the back of the bike, and I'm 38 weeks pregnant, and I biked here because I want my kids to grow up in a community that invests in infrastructure so that my kids can get around safely in a way that is workable for our family. So the current lack of bike infrastructure, as we just heard about, and I grew up here too, endangers kids, particularly once they're too big to go on a parent's bike. Even we talk about small side streets, but those small side streets are complex to bike. You need to watch for parked cars on both sides, where if you go closer to them to let other traffic through, you risk being doored. You're having cars each way weave in and out of each other. I had dealt with a F-150 that was really unwilling to yield all the way down Hampshire the other day. And so you're trying to watch for a lot of different things at the same time. And of course, if the smaller the cyclists, the less visible they are to, say, cars coming out of driveways between parked cars, and it does get quite concerning. And so, of course, I'm thinking about when my kids are too big for me to schlep on my cargo bike, how do they continue that way? Because we are a family that doesn't have a car, and we would like to stay that way. It's more affordable, obviously, and we know young families face an affordability crisis between housing, childcare, and just general cost of living. And we also know that everyone's concerned about the parking impacts of densification. We have tenants who share our house. We don't have a car, they have a car, but they use the one parking spot in our driveway. And so, if it's no longer safe for us to get around by bike, then that creates that pressure where we may be adding to the parking load. I would hope that what was proposed in the 2011 plan around the Central Oak Bay neighborhood bikeway could be added to the list of current priorities, because there's currently nothing helping those of us in South Oak Bay to connect to these new amenities that would be proposed north of the avenue. And it's, I would assume that Monterey-St. Anne route is what makes the most sense. Right now, I can get all the way once I get to Richardson, which is fairly close to my house, I can get all the way on a bike lane to Crystal Pool or Esquimalt Pool. I cannot, however, get to Oak Bay Rec. And likewise, if I lived in Fernwood, I could come straight down Fort all the way to Oak Bay Rec on a bike lane, but I can't get there from South Oak Bay, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Would you like me to stop there and then come back in a bit, or can I keep going?
Why don't you keep going for give
Okay.
you another minute or so? And,
Thanks.
yeah, you got to roll.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'd say the Bowker Creek multi-use pathway, I was a bit confused in the report because it said completed, and I think the appendix, but I certainly wouldn't consider that to be somewhere I could safely bike without endangering pedestrians. You can't go two ways. Some of the paving is pretty uneven, like at an angle that's kind of dangerous for a bike. And then there are the maze gates at Hampshire that make it really impractical to like unload and wheel a heavily loaded cargo bike through those gates. So I wonder about that. And yeah, I guess I would just close and say, you know, I'm glad to see shovel-ready projects on here because 2011 was a long time ago, and it's disheartening to see the lack of progress since then. But I hope that this could be clearly articulated as kind of a phase 1, and perhaps that staff could be asked to come back with a recommendation for phase 2 on a fairly urgent timeline, because that level, you know, that will completely miss my kids. They will be like leaving home if we continue at the current pace. And so, you know, some urgency and seriousness would, I think, help to address the comparative lack of ambition that Oak Bay has seen compared to neighboring municipalities. So the more we can build some momentum, that would be great. And, you know, kids deserve to get around safely in our communities. They can't drive, which I think is a good thing. I don't think the solution to getting kids around in this day and age of climate and knowing the need for physical activity and health should be that each child is driven everywhere they need to go. So, thank you.
Ms. Knight. If you want to come up again, by all means, I'll just give a chance for other people to come forward at this point. Anybody else wish? Yes, come on forward. You're definitely the most appropriately dressed for the night.
Hi, everybody. I don't really like dressing like this. It's a bit outrageous. It's a bit much, don't you think? But I really just tell my colleagues at work that I just want to get to my destination safely. So hi, I'm sorry I don't know you. My name is Yvonne Mendel. I've been a volunteer as a biking advocate for 5 years. My passion is getting young children between the ages of 3 and about 8 biking. So I've used my family's money and grant money to provide biking clinics for really young children, some as young as 2.5. And I really believe that getting really young children can ride bikes from the age of 2.5. My son was riding on the road around the age of 4, but his brain development wasn't there. And he's 10 now, and he has extremely good bike skills, and his brain development still isn't quite there. My family chooses to bike to school sometimes. I live in the city of Victoria on the Vancouver bike lane, and my family owns 3 vehicles. I'm really sorry. But we choose to cycle as much as possible in town. My husband works at UVic and bikes along the Henderson bikeway every day, and our children are taking like summer programming up at UVic, and so we bike along that bikeway all the time, and I biked through Oak Bay on Foul Bay to go downtown today. So I also have a Facebook group with 450 families with young children that are really interested in biking. Young children can and do bike, and we're raising the next generation. So I was really excited to see this topic come up. I really would like to see progress in time for my children when they want to play basketball in Oak Bay and come to destinations in Oak Bay. We like to spend money in Oak Bay, but we choose to drive here. And I couldn't help but notice that Oak Bay Bicycles has a big bicycle rental going on there, and they often do demos where you can try e-bikes for free. So I highly recommend that, and I think it can really change your life and make you feel really independent and healthy. So I'm excited for the progress here. I remember at a time at Salish Council about 8 years ago when the room was packed and we were on the cusp of the decision for Shelburne Valley, and now those changes are going to be built. So that's very exciting, and I think that there are hundreds of families here that are not represented presented tonight. I had to give up putting my daughter to bed tonight. She was stung by a bee and she has a very swollen hand. But I know that there are families that are watching online because I posted the feed and I've been promoting this, and I hope that families have written in. I've shared photos of my family, and my family's just in a good example. So my daughter is 6.5 and my son is 10, and they started riding with me, in the carrier when my daughter was about a year old. And bikes mean good business. Having more cyclists in your municipality, it really funds businesses like Oak Bay Bikes. My family spends a lot of money at places like Oak Bay Bikes. So I have like a $5,500 mountain bike outside. I hope it's okay. My family spends about $1,500 a year on maintenance for just that one bike, and we have about 10 to 12 bikes at our house. So it means big business. There's a lot of bike mechanics that work at Oak Bay Bikes. Some of them are friends, so, and it's not just about urban cycling. I would say that mountain biking feeds urban cycling. So I've worked a lot with the Capital Regional District. The Mountain Biking Society has 1,200 members from all across the Capital Region. And so when you put in urban cycling lanes, that is an invite to those mountain bikers as well. Mountain bikers tend to commute by bike. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mandel, and so of course how we met previously. So, and if you want to get back to your kids, you're welcome to. You can continue to watch online as well. Is there anybody else? I don't see anybody online that's raised their hand to speak, but.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I just noticed that someone has added a comment to the chat. I don't know if those get added to the minutes or if you wanted to.
Oh, sure. We can have a look at that. But in the meantime, I'll deal with the. Yeah, they're just people commenting that they agree with the speakers. So I'm not sure if we count those in minutes or not. They're not part of the public view, so it's probably, I'm not sure. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Corey Berger. I'm a resident of the township of Esquimalt these days, but I grew up in Oak Bay, and I learned how to ride my bike at the top of Yale Street. It was a fun experience. I learned how brakes worked really quickly. So I just want to speak a little bit. I am the Policy and Infrastructure Chair for Capital Bike. I've been involved with Capital Bike and Bike to Work before and the GVCC for 8-9 years at this point. And I just want to speak a little bit about the active transportation strategy. I think it's exciting to see this come back. I actually sat on the Citizens Initiatives Committee that worked on the original ATS back in 2010 and 2011, and unfortunately Councillor Braithwaite isn't here this evening, otherwise she'd probably be able to tell you what public engagement we did. I certainly had a quick look through my email, couldn't find anything. But I think it was important that, I remember the discussions at the time, 12 years ago, around what it looked like. And, I think if we'd been in that room and said in 12 years' time, 750 meters is all that will get built, I don't think we would have believed it. So I think it's important to recognize that, here in Oak Bay, there has been a real lack of building. If you look across the region, since 2011, Oak Bay did lead the way. It was the first active transportation strategy in the region. Everyone else is caught up or passed. And, even tonight, the town of Sydney is talking about active transportation with their active transportation plan. And, that plan has seen some challenges. There was some significant opposition within the community, but even then, they're still going to be building tomorrow. They've already given direction to council and they've already done some work. So I think it's important for Oak Bay to catch up. That's the glass half empty statement, but there's also a glass half full statement. There's been a lot of community interest in biking here in Oak Bay. As we've seen through the rides that have come here, when Henderson came up last time, through many, many different avenues, people, want to ride more here in Oak Bay. They want to be, their families, they want to come ride. And, that's an amazing thing that a lot of councils don't have, is having a lot of people who are super passionate, who will come up and show up and support sometimes very challenging, politically challenging projects. Steve Rennick was just talking about removing parking. That's a very politically challenging project. But there's people who will show up and support that if you want to talk about it. In fact, this very room has seen that a little over almost 15 years ago. Removing some of the parking, at least part-time, on Henderson was a very politically challenging project. So, I'd encourage you, use that momentum, use that resource in the community to get those challenging projects through. We provided you a number of different examples. There's lots of great things happening in the region, so I'd strongly encourage you, take a look at what the CRD, what all the other municipalities in the region are doing. Learn from them. Everyone's learning along the way. I mean, it's only been a couple of years since the new design guidelines came out. So we're excited to see what comes forward, and we're excited to work with you on as you work through new things and as you build out, hopefully a AAA network in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berger. I still don't have any hands online, so is there anybody else in the room? Yes, please come forward.
Hi, my name is Tom Newton. I live at 2125 Oak Bay Avenue, so a couple of doors down. I'm a member of Walk on Victoria. I'm on the steering committee and have been since 2014, and have been involved in active transportation planning, first of all in Salish, as part of the 2018 stakeholders committee that formed the active transportation plan in Salish, and more recently involved in the Salish Road Safety Action Plan. And I think what I'm hearing tonight is a lot of focus on bikes, and I think that's a really important thing, and I agree with the quick move on that. But when I read through the 2011 report that I assume you're also going to be adopting, that's a 12-year-old report, and a lot has changed in those 12 years in terms of the community's understanding and the society's understanding of pedestrian and cycling needs and active transportation. I think active transportation wasn't even a term then. So it's important, I think, to have some input on that 2011 policy because there's things it misses. For instance, one of the things I've noted in there about Oak Bay Avenue, they say one of the priorities is looking at Oak Bay Avenue from Yale Street to Oliver. But if you remember last week, we were discussing the build-outs on Oak Bay, and those are not, there's only one small one there in that area. But where the sidewalks are the narrowest on Oak Bay are from Mitchell to Yale and from Oliver down to Newport. But there you have really narrow sidewalks and quite used sidewalks. They're not mentioned in that report, and I think that's just one area that needs to be looked at. So my concern is if you adopt this report, are you going to be locked into a 2011, a decade-old report that doesn't take into account what other community areas in the community are doing? I recently led, with my partner, a James Walk in Esquimalt. And when we were in Esquimalt, we met with the head of engineering in Esquimalt. And they have a really neat active transportation plan that draws out exactly when things are going to happen, what date. So when we led our James Walk, we could say to there were 30 people on our walk, we could say, so Kinross is going to get a new sidewalk next year. This is in the plan. And this street is going to get a new sidewalk the year after. So they had definite timelines, and I don't see that in the 2011 report or in the refreshed report. So these are the things I think council needs to look at, and I would urge you to get community input. All of these areas, Saanich particularly, has done a really good job at having stakeholders' input, and they have it documented. I know you probably had stakeholders in 2011, but that's a long time ago and probably
Mr.
not
Newton,
the same people.
I'm not going to cut you off. You're welcome to stay here and continue, but because you're touching on some very important points, and okay. You're right, some of this is a little less specific on some of those pedestrian pieces, and I just think I can ask Mr. Rennick. I know you didn't come here prepared necessarily for this, but we have two things. There's a sidewalk process that we're undertaking right now for sidewalks in Oak Bay, and we have the village area plan, which is part of our priorities. Maybe you can just speak to the scope of those, at least in some of the timelines, because you're right, we're not there yet, but that intention is to kind of get to that point. But Mr. Rennick, perhaps you can touch on those two items.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The 2023 Active Transportation Strategy, the draft report that's attached to this report, references that there is another draft report called the Pedestrian and Sidewalk Master Plan that this council and perhaps members of the public will recall there was some public engagement, there were a couple of workshops. That report was not ready, has not yet been shared with council. The consultant working on the Active Transportation Strategy refresh has seen the draft of the Pedestrian and Sidewalk Master Plan. And so I think that I agree there is a need to harmonize those two plans. And I think that we there's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. Do we wait to bring this while we get the Pedestrian and Sidewalk Master Plan finished? Well, no, we know the quick win projects. And so I think that's why the quick win projects are bike lane projects. I would also like to just briefly comment that we're aware that there's no implementation plan. That was one of the staff recommendations. Recommendation number 3 was that staff provide an implementation plan for the 2023 Active Transportation Strategy. So I didn't mention that before, but yes, we're aware there's no implementation plan, and we are seeking direction to come back with an implementation plan.
Thank you, Mr. Reddick. And Mr. Newton, you probably knew that, but I thought I'd just ask the question sometimes to staff to get some
That's good.
clarification on
I
those.
just have one other thing, and I've talked to some of you about that. Curb cuts.
Curb cuts.
Quick fix on curb cuts, because people are falling or tipping over on their walkers because the curb cuts, especially one right outside the hall here, are really bad, and I've seen people go over on them. Okay, thank you.
No, thank you for that. A little outside the strategy, but we actually had a conversation the other day on that to resolve it. We have Jess Prince online. If you wish to unmute yourself and introduce yourself, you're welcome to the meeting.
Hi, actually, this is Brian Wall. Jess Prince is my partner, so I was going to speak instead, if that's okay. We are Oak Bay residents. I'm an emergency physician, and I work at both the hospitals in the area. My family is an active biking family. We have 2 young children, an 18-month-old and a 4-year-old. We bike them every single day to their daycare. My partner bikes downtown to her government job in the legislature. And I bike to both hospitals, all the way out to the Victoria General on the Galloping Goose. By far, the most dangerous part of our bike route is just getting out of our local neighborhood in Oak Bay. I recently wrote a letter to the Times Colonist. We wrote in a letter for this council meeting as well, so I'll keep this relatively short. But I do want to put a human factor on this. I'm one of the many team members who treat bicycle trauma. We reset bones, femurs that are sticking out of legs, resuscitate brain bleeds and collapsed lungs, and I have pronounced people dead from bicycle trauma in this city. And I do think it's shameful and embarrassing, the lack of action and lack of appropriate timeline in Oak Bay. And I do want the council members, every time you do see a media report of a trauma, of injury and accident, that this is not bad drivers, it's bad infrastructure and it's bad legislation. And when we really consider our priorities and motivations in terms of having convenient parking on the road for parties on the weekend or evenings for residents versus preventing injury and death, I think that you really need to consider what's more important. So we really would like protected physical barrier bike lanes on main routes, as well as bikeways such as Richardson and Victoria. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wall. Is there anybody else? Please come forward. We've almost reached the quorum of everybody in the room here, having had a chance to speak, so welcome.
My name's Jean Newton. I live at 2125 Oak Bay Avenue. I agree with everything that's been said so far. I won't repeat that. What I do want to say is I don't know if people recognize, the report doesn't recognize how far-spreading active transportation is to the well-being in the lives of people in the community. There's just a handful of us here tonight. We don't represent so many of the people in Oak Bay. So I want to say first, there's no reference in this report to acknowledge that probably between 20 and 25% of the people in this community never drive. They can't drive. And that's a figure I get from the average in other communities. I assume Oak Bay might even be on the high end of that, given how many older people we have who did drive and have given up driving. And for these people, I think it was you, Corinne, who put on, our Councillor Green, who put on CUPE Local, that you'd like to see this passion that people have about safety of bike lanes translated into so many other important areas in our lives. For an older person whose independence depends on being able to walk safely on a sidewalk and not trip on a curb cut and cross the street and not worry about falling, this is a mental health issue. It's an issue of independence. And it's also an issue of how many times their son or daughter or other family members have to drive across town and pick them up to take them places where these people would like to be able to get to by themselves. So for many, many older people who used to drive and no longer drive, it's a huge issue. It's also a huge issue for people with disabilities, and we know we're coming in with accessibility plans soon. Not all accessibility issues are visible to us. There's people with health conditions that mean they can't drive, but we don't know that. They look okay. And there's people with accessibility issues and mobility challenges that are very obvious. But there's a lot of people like that. Someone spoke tonight about children. Parents chauffeur their children in cars, and grandparents do too, all the time, when many of these parents would like their kids to be able to cycle safely and walk safely to school. But they can't because they don't feel safe about it, and it isn't safe. And there's no better way to raise a generation of people who believe that the car is how we travel than to take them every day of their life from infancy everywhere they need to go in a car. So we really sort of, build our car-centric society that way. Something I've been involved in active transportation for decades. Something that never comes up in these discussions is weather. So it's a beautiful day today, and anyone could ride their bike here. But late October to into March, if you're standing outside waiting for a bus in the rain, or if you're riding your bike, or if you're getting splashed by all the cars that go by, and it's night at 5 o'clock sometimes, it's a huge issue. So I'd like to ask council to delay accepting this plan until we have proper community consultation with the stakeholders who are most affected by active transportation, the lack of, and what we're going to do about it. Because we have a lot of lived expertise in this community. If we can't it's not enough to do a survey and then some people don't do the survey and we think that's the answer. We need to do more than that. We need to say, let's get a stakeholder committee together of pedestrians. Let's get a stakeholder committee of cyclists. And let's look at the accessibility issues. And let's look at what we can come up with. Now, it's always a huge issue of funding, I know that. But there's grants to be applied for that aren't being applied for because there's health. And health is an area that you can sometimes get money. I worked in mental health as a career for 30 years. You can get money sometimes for health issues. Not all grants have to be about road construction. So I think we have ways to go about getting money. I think we have ways to go about addressing climate change. That's another big, huge thing. If we don't build an active transportation network that's good enough to allow people to have a choice not to drive, then we're not going to address climate change, which is really important.
Ms. Newton,
I could go on, so I'm not going to.
I've got somebody else who just raised their hand. If you want to come back up again, or you can wrap up. You can either wrap up for the next 30 seconds, or you can come back up if you wish.
we need to share our common space, and the roads and the sidewalks are common space. And you see a lot of anger, sometimes by motorists, directed at people advocating for cycling and sidewalks. Every concession to a pedestrian and a cyclist is not a huge loss to a motorist. It's just a way of sharing our space differently. And we're going to have to move away from the car. And there's all the issues about plugging in things and bike parking and all that needs to come into the picture. So this discussion, even 3 minutes for each of us, this is a big discussion. And it's a big issue, and it shouldn't be in the middle of the summer when everyone's on holidays coming on the agenda. Can we approve this? It's just not, it's not what the community needs. That's all.
Thank you very much for that. I have Mr. Edwardson online.
Yeah, good evening. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. My name is Mark Edwardson. I live at 1566 Yale Street. Been living here for a couple of years. I think fundamentally Oak Bay's first responsibility should be trying to keep people safe. Like if people are getting hit on their bikes or getting hit as pedestrians, Oak Bay as a municipality is fundamentally failing at its job. And right now it kind of feels like our roads are designed in order to hurt people. Like I really hate to say it, but it feels like we've fallen behind other municipalities in trying to build safe pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. So like a 10-year-old could feel comfortable riding around Oak Bay. And we're falling behind other municipalities that have shown considerable more vision than current and previous Oak Bay councils in investing in new infrastructure, in trying to change the way our streets are built so it's actually safe and accessible and easy for people to get around. I think this is downstream of a couple of problems. I think first is just so far we don't care. Council has not shown this to be a priority. We don't invest the money. We don't invest the time to build safe streets. We just sort of have been sitting on our hands and not doing anything about it. I think another important point, though, that hasn't been brought up so far really is that our actual housing policy has been holding back our infrastructure investments for some time. Unlike Victoria or Sandwich, we've got very few new developments. We've got an outdated zoning code that makes it functionally legal to build new housing here. And so we've got basically this like diminishing, increasingly old tax base. We've got fewer businesses. We don't have a reliable source of DCCs or CACs. The lack of housing reforms that Oak Bay is putting forward means I doubt we're going to be getting much money from the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund. And we're kind of unique in this regard. Sandwich and Victoria have both shown considerable more vision in raising revenue from new housing development. And so our housing policy is sort of like our active transportation policy, is that we're set up to just do nothing. And I think we need to make some changes. We need to reform things. We need to reform our zoning. We need to encourage more development. We need to actually find ways to raise money, to actually fund projects, because it's not just enough here to say, well, we don't have money, we can't build anything. It's your job to actually find ways of raising revenue. If it's from property taxes, if it's from the province or the federal government, please find ways of raising revenue so we can get some projects built. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Edwardson. I think we've gone through our attendees mostly here. Does anybody else wish to speak to us? Can I come back up? So we'll allow for a second time. I do at some point want to come back to this table so we can start getting some direction, but no, by all means, come up. I can tell you've been thinking away, so you have a couple other things you want to add, so why don't you come up and complete your thoughts.
Thank you, and thank you for the indulgence of a second turn. Again, Maggie Knight, Oak Bay resident. Just a couple more things I wanted to offer is, one of the benefits of dedicated bike routes is that you feel like you belong there as a cyclist, which in and of itself gives you a little bit of shelter from some of the motorist aggression that sometimes you experience, where people swear at you or honk at you or yell at you for getting in their way and slowing them down. People don't do that to me on Richardson anymore because you don't drive on Richardson unless you know that if you're driving on Richardson, there are going to be a bunch of bikes there. That's not the case if I try to get down Foul Bay and cars feel like they're more entitled to get somewhere faster and that I'm in their way and impeding them. I would like to not be in their way. I would like to be in my own way. But there is no way for me to go, so that's where I end up. You know, I think there's a real window right now in terms of the popularity of cargo bikes for families and the e-bike rebate programs and so on. So there's a real opportunity right now to make progress, and I would hate for Oak Bay to miss it, especially because we were kind of out ahead at one point, but we kind of dropped the ball for a while. And I would offer that, you know, drivers sometimes will say, oh, it'll increase congestion, it'll slow things down. And I think that's really predicated on this idea that, like, drivers deserve to get where they want to get at the speed they want to get there. And so bikes should therefore, like, go some back route and go the long way around. And I would just offer, you know, time is money for everybody. I'm self-employed. You know, if I don't bill as many hours, then I don't make as much money that pays my taxes and all the other things. And, you know, if I can't bike safely, and so then I go to transit, transit is really infrequent to many parts of Oak Bay, and that would dramatically increase the number of hours that I lose in getting my kids around affordably by bike. Often I can bike somewhere pretty much as quickly as you can drive, especially when you consider parking. Just a couple of other pieces. It would be really helpful if in the final communication of the finalized refresh, if there were a map of here's what's being proposed as the priorities. Because I know there's the 2011 map, but it took me quite a while puzzling through with Google Maps to figure out what would this actually look like and where are the gaps in connection. And certainly by the time it's built, we need a map because, you know, I don't leave home before I have a route plan because I don't want to suddenly end up in a dodgy situation with my kid on the back. And that would be really helpful. Yeah, and just say, you know, car-free families deserve to live just as full lives as those with vehicles. I grew up here playing soccer, actually with Councillor Braithwaite's daughter. So, you know, go Bays. And maybe my kids will indulge me in letting me be a soccer mom. I would love to be a soccer mom with a cargo bike. But right now, I could not get safely to Carnarvon, to Henderson. Even Fireman's would be a little bit challenging. So I just want to be a safe soccer mom, and that feels difficult right now. Lastly, I would just say, you know, I understand the political pressure that comes around parking in particular. I know it's challenging, but I'm saying, you know, I will put in the sweat equity and buy the rain gear and brave the elements and teach my kids day in, day out how to be safe on their bikes. But I don't have the power to change the infrastructure to support everybody in being safe. Cars don't want to hit me, but when the infrastructure doesn't support them to know that I'm there or to be divided from where I'm going, that increases the risk to everybody. But of course, cyclists are more vulnerable to the ultimate results of an impact. So, you know, we teach our kids to share. This is about sharing the roads. And I'd say almost every single road in Oak Bay currently prioritizes cars. I'm not asking for a separated, dedicated bike lane on every single road, just enough that we can get around safely. And if we can teach our kids to share, then I'm sure that even the adults can remember how to do that too. So, thank you.
I don't see other hands online. Welcome back, Mr. Berger. If you just state your name and municipality residence again for the record. We have quite a bit of correspondence from you as well here. So
Thanks very much. I just wanted to, Corey Berger, Township of Esquimalt, elaborate a little bit on our recommendation 4, which is send a revised ATS out for public engagement. Based on some of the comments I've seen here, it's relatively rare that we at Capital Bike will say, please talk some more. But we feel that it's important in this one, just around the level of understanding, you know, what is the intersection between the 2023 and the 2011 plan? And I think it's worth spending a little bit of money and a little bit of staff time putting those two plans back together again in a single document and adding in a few pieces that we've already mentioned. We've talked about, AAA networks and those kinds of pieces. And then bringing in other things like the Safe Routes to Schools documents, which hasn't come up here today. I actually took a look at the original 2007 Safe Routes to School document for Willows, a Cole Willow school. The number of kids who ride to Cole Willow School has actually gone down between 2007 and 2019. It's dropped by about 1%. The number of kids who walk has dropped by about 3%. So, you have those documents. There's some amazing pieces to plug into an expanded plan that I think, get staff working on building something. We recommend, the Haltane Estevan and then the Cadbro Bay, but whatever you choose, get staff working on something, and then also ask staff in parallel to go out and do a little bit more work on putting together a comprehensive plan, and then send that out for public engagement. Even if that takes another 6 months, I think it's worth it, as long as you're still working through the process towards getting a grant this year for a piece of infrastructure. So thank you.
Very much, Mr. Berger. Anybody else wish to speak? We are here. Yeah, come forward. The only person in the room who hasn't spoken yet, so you might as well come forward.
So, Andrea Careless, I live in Oak Bay, and I've cycled pretty much, I guess, for 30 years. And for one thing, I worked in the Ministry of Environment and Air Quality and Climate Change, so anybody who didn't cycle would be ostracized. I don't really have anything to add because what everyone has said here today has been amazing. I just think that there's one concept that bikers are privileged and want so much. For example, on North Henderson, that's what I heard from people is, we're so privileged. Well, we're the people who, a lot of people, our kids or teenagers, they don't have cars, or when they're older, they can't afford cars. They're people who choose to bike for health, and there are a lot of us who choose to bike because we're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and do our own thing. And so we go out in the rain, get soaking wet in our rain gear, and so that whole concept of being privileged is just, I think it needs to be addressed, and that kind of takes me to a more broader problem, which is I think we need engagement in Oak Bay and actually everywhere with people who hate cyclists and hate bike lanes. And I mean, these are nice people. They just really need more education in my point of view. So I think there should be some consultation and engagement around the strategy, not just so cycling and walkability advocates can talk, but also the people who don't like bike lanes can talk. We should give them a chance because they have their own point of view, but also because maybe they can learn more about the importance of active transportation. And the last thing I just would like to say is, let's remember that active transportation is related to good transit. So just keep that in mind, that we also need better transit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Careless. Any other comments before I come back to this table? Oh, thank you, Mr. Rennick. Doing multiple duties today on your microphone off and on and answering engineering questions. All right, so I'll come back to this table. Thank you very much to everybody who's provided input. We are now going to look at this report that's in front of us. And I think structurally, we have a number of recommendations within this piece. Obviously, we have to receive the report, but we also have to decide whether we're going to endorse it as is or with some specific changes, or there's been some request to perhaps go back out for further public input, some direction on going forward with specific designs in some areas, if that's the desire of the body. And then also the last recommendation here, of course, is for an implementation plan to lay out some of this. So we can do some, all, or none of that, of course, but perhaps if there's any additional questions that have been arisen out of the things here, we'll take questions first, and then, well, actually, you know what, questions and comments are fine at this point. So I have Councillor Patterson, Watson, Appleton. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I guess I have some comments, and I certainly was very interesting listening to everybody who took the time to come here and speak to us tonight. I was fairly newly arrived when active transportation was going on, and the 2011 report came out, so it was interesting to listen to it here in Oak Bay. I've listened to it across Canada and other communities. I support active transportation, but I will say that one thing that I did note in that report, probably because of my background, was that report did point out that the lack of reserve funds was a barrier to reaching the goals in the report. So I actively started approaching council to boost reserve funds, not only for active transportation, but for infrastructure and many things in Oak Bay. And I think it's important, based on a lot of what I've heard in the comments tonight, to just say that I'm very proud to have sat on the last council term in Oak Bay, which was the first council that, since I moved here, that actually addressed reserve funding, not only for active transportation, but for all of our infrastructure and our facilities. And it hasn't necessarily been easy because the taxes are linked to that. So, but I think it's important to just state that I feel quite proud that last council term, at the council table, we tackled that. Is it perfect? No, not yet, but we are on a path moving forward. Specific to this report, I like a lot of what staff have presented and laid out here, and obviously there's going to have to be some public engagement, but generally I'm supporting what is proposed. Although I do have, as Councillor Appleton talked about earlier, I have a little bit of difficulty with endorsing it as a refresh of the active transportation strategy, because as some of the people present have alluded to here, and I think of this as a strategy, as a policy or a plan to achieve an overall aim of improving person-powered transportation, whether it be walking, biking, wheeling, skateboarding. And so it's got to incorporate all of those elements so that we're not leaving any member of the community behind. We're addressing it all fully. And that it must interface with public transportation systems for maximum sustainability. So, and if we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and be kinder to our environment. So the overall active transportation has to be fully inclusive of all of those. And I don't see that. I see this as a refreshed program within the active transportation strategy, which I support. But so I would probably have some amended wording to propose to at least the recommendation that the refreshed 2023 active transportation strategy be endorsed, because I don't want to convey the wrong impression to the community. I think the active transportation strategy has to be much broader. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I had Councillor Watson and then Appleton.
Yes, first I would just like to ask a question, and it's probably to Ms. Williams, actually, but maybe not, and then I have some comments I'd like to make. My question is, if we adopted how does what's in front of us tonight relate to the thing that's already incorporated in the OCP? And what happens to anything we do tonight to the status of that project and its situation? As incorporated in the OCP.
Mr. Rennick, is this just changing this require changes to the OCP?
I don't see that endorsing this strategy requires changing the OCP, because this strategy is essentially, as I had said earlier, just reframing some of the projects that were in the 2011 strategy. I don't see this as being in conflict with the OCP.
Watson?
Thank you. with that reassurance, I would just say generally, I know we're probably about to get into some really more detailed discussion about what should happen next, but I would say that having listened to all sorts of helpful input from the public, both here and through the correspondence, and seeing some reasonably thought through ideas for what we should do next, although I do believe that at some point greater engagement with the community is required, that stalling moving forward in order to do that would be the wrong thing to do at this point in time. I think as we had the example last week of a public works sewer infrastructure project, which was one of maybe many things we could do, we agreed to it because doing anything was better than doing nothing. We needed to make progress, and with respect to active transportation infrastructure, doing anything right now would be better than doing nothing. And there are some really good projects in this proposal. So notwithstanding it's not perfection, we do not need to get to perfect before we act, in my view. And I hope that we can pick out of this a couple of things that we do take forward to design and planning straight away. I also do want to say that although I understand why the project is not considered a quick win, that the doing something about the part-time bike lane on Henderson seems to me to be such a quick win. If it's just a policy matter and not one that requires funding, that we should be looking at that. And finally, I do take to heart the comment from one of the members of the public, I think it was Mr. Taddy, who said that while I totally agree that we should be looking for as much grant funding as possible and make that line up with our objectives, we should not be, and we do not just need to be using grant money in order to further these objectives, that there are other ways to go about that too. So I wouldn't want lack of access to grants to restrict us from being more aggressive in moving this plan forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I have Councillor Appleton, then Green. I'm assuming Councillor Smart would like to speak as well. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of follow-up questions through you to staff. I appreciate Mr. Rennick's comments about the Haltane and Foul Bay, the Foul Bay crossing for Haltane, and I think that that's a significant component. For what I heard was that that's something that's under discussions and kind of underway. So I'm just looking for a little bit of clarification on that. Is that something that is implicitly considered in the bikeway component that's the bikeway recommendation that's here? Does council need to provide further direction or include that as a separate component to specifically make sure that the Foul Bay and Haltane crossing is included? And what's council's next sort of touch point and feedback point for that discussion with Saanich on that crossing?
Mr. Rennick?
Through you, Mayor, I would consider the crossing at Haltane and Foul Bay to be implicit to the Haltane project. The next touch point would basically be we would bring back a detailed design for public comment or for council's consideration, however council chooses to direct that process.
Thank you. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just sort of on a slightly different note, recommendation number 3 in the staff report relates to an implementation plan for the refreshed active transportation strategy. Are we talking about an implementation plan? The refresh strategy implies that it's the entirety of the strategy. So are we talking about an implementation plan for the network as laid out in the 2011 plan as well? Or are we talking about an implementation plan for the components and recommendations that are included in the 2023 review? Is that what, I'd just like to be specific about what that recommendation means.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Rennick?
I appreciate the specificity because what we wrote is an implementation plan for the refreshed 2023 active transportation strategy, but what we speak to in the analysis is essentially what council was looking for, which was that 5-year plan of what projects are we going to deliver. And so I wouldn't think that that would be limited to the ones that were in the 2023 update. We would certainly be considering the 2023 update gives us some kind of priority projects. That would certainly be where we would start. There's the quick wins, there's the other priorities, but I don't think there's enough in the 2023 to build a 5-year program. So we would be doing an implementation plan on the full 2011 program.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, and I appreciate that. So essentially, we are talking about this is, again, I guess it kind of got raised as a bit of a staged approach at different times. This is sort of what is in front of us is the most immediate or the top priorities at this point. The implementation plan would potentially present several stages of potential implementation and several layers of priority projects on different timelines. Is that what I understand?
Mr. Rennick?
Yes, that is essentially, you are correct in that. We hear the comment of wanting to do something quickly, and so that's why we have the separate recommendation for those neighborhood bikeways. Even if there's a desire on the part of this council to not endorse this strategy, to do additional consultation, you have that separate recommendation so that you have some projects in the pipeline. We wanted to give maximum flexibility to council.
Council Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just finally, this is maybe a little bit of a difficult one to respond to, but I understand the use of the language refreshed active transportation strategy, and we've also talked a little bit today about a reframe and a presentation of priority projects, and it is kind of all of those things. The language that the consultant uses in presenting their report is, their document is titled The Review of Oak Bay Active Transportation Strategy. So as to clarify and be clear to the public and collectively as to what we are recommending, putting forward, and I'm asking this question, could recommendation 1, rather than it read the way that it does, could it read that the review of Oak Bay Active Transportation Strategy, 2023 be endorsed as presented? Like, are those two things, in the opinion of staff, the same thing? And would that allow us to clarify a little bit?
Mr. Rennick?
I don't think that those are the same thing, but I think that that would also be an acceptable motion. I think that would be going back to the consultant and essentially saying, well, let's retitle, or it's not even retitling the report. It's really more staff retitling how we refer to that point, that report, because you are correct. They do refer to it as the review of the 2011 active transportation strategy. And it could make our lives easier of saying, well, we're not replacing the 2011 strategy, we just did a review on it.
Thank you. And thanks for the clarification to you and staff. I have Councillor Green next, and then Councillor Smart.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thanks to everyone that came tonight. Really appreciated all of the input and all of the comments. And I'll be very brief. I really appreciate the report, Mr. Rennick. Thank you. It does lay it out more specifically. Let me just play devil's advocate for a minute, though. Well, maybe not devil's advocate. Let me be honest about some of the things I've heard. And these are the things that I'm concerned about. And one is that cycling and driving don't seem to be a unifying topic at the moment. It has been a really divisive topic in some communities, and we have demonized drivers, we have somehow demonized cyclists. I want us to get away from that. I really agree with Mrs. Newton, I believe, when she talks about the importance of engaging everybody, and so inclusivity is really important. I'm concerned about balance also, and the fact that there are many, many things that a small community has to balance, councils in particular. I think it's unfortunate that Oak Bay has been cast as being somehow behind the times and all the rest of it. I want to pick up on the comment that Councillor Patterson made, and that is that I was also part of the last council that made the first financial investments in this plan and in active transportation. And we've had a really good support around the table on this planning. I also want to talk about accessibility because that is coming. I think, again, Mrs. Newton raised that issue. Again, we have to be inclusive. And so it isn't just about riding a bicycle safely in this community, it is, or commuting. and children and so on. It's about everyone, and making sure that pedestrians, people with mobility issues, and other concerns are included in whatever plan we design. I really appreciate the idea of doing some early quick wins. I thank you for that in the report. And finally, I really want the public consultation piece to be positive, not negative. I really want us to respect one another when we talk about cycling and driving in the same sentence. That hasn't always been the case, and I've had personal experience recently with that issue. So I think it's difficult. These are difficult issues for decision makers, definitely. But again, this council is committed, and I believe that. And I think it's time to recast Oak Bay as perhaps moving forward, not because it didn't want to, but because there were so many other pressures financially. And it is true that we just, it's a difficult time at the moment. But I really appreciate everyone's input, and let's make this a positive undertaking, not one that is divisive. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I just want to start off by saying, through you, Mayor, to Ms. Director Rennick, I really appreciate the report in providing the detailed design and quick win options as well in the context of this broader plan. I think, hearing so many people talk today, we really need to center this on safety, and we really need to look at the fact of how little has been accomplished in the last decade. There's the urgency around pursuing the quick wins and the conceptual design that we can't lose track of. And then there is the very necessary consultation around the details going forward. I also feel uncomfortable with the wording of recommendation number 1, but I would very much like to prioritize recommendation number 3 with putting forward an implementation plan that then would go for public consultation. I think that public consultation is going to be a lot more meaningful if it comes in the form of actually having the implementation plan, and we'll have more to talk about with the public. And with regards to recommendation number 2, I think it's really important that we go for some quick wins and we don't waste another year or two talking about this more. We do need to talk, but we can do it while we also implement some quick wins that have been very thoughtfully put forward here. And then if there is an appetite for discussing recommendation number 1 with some alterations, I just want to quickly mention, I guess the alterations that I would want to bring up are just related, again, to the intersections that have been brought up tonight, just prioritizing the Haltane and Fowl Bay intersection, as well as the Oak Bay Ave and Elgin crossing. And additionally, the Oak Bay Ave proposal for protected lanes. I would really want to look at different options for potentially a shared neighborhood approach for Oak Bay as well. So we didn't have such a great impact potentially on parking. And the third one I just want to point out is that in some of these various maps that have been brought forward, granted some of them are from the old strategy, the neighborhood of Harling Point is continually cut off of the maps. It's meaningful to include all of Oak Bay on these maps. So just be careful to keep that neighborhood on the map. And I really do strongly propose that even though some of it is in the City of Victoria's property, there is one missing link on this entire map to a continuous cycling route. And that is the neighborhood of Harling Point actually being connected to Oak Bay in a way that doesn't go up King George Terrace. And even though we might not be the ones to implement all of that, the coordination of that needs to be a part of this plan. Otherwise, you're cutting off hundreds of households from being able to cycle to anywhere in their neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. And I'm hearing a lot of I think, agreement in terms of a path forward here. I just have a few minor comments. First of all, I want to express my appreciation to all of you who actually took the time to come sit in our uncomfortable chairs for a few hours and talk to us. It's not always easy to do, or because those that sat online as well and joined us. It's always nice to hear from everybody that comes out. And I really do appreciate the respectful tone and sort of positive, how do we get there, faster, how do we get there better kind of approach to the conversation. So thank you for that. I was kind of laughing a little bit about the investment in infrastructure because I ride back and forth from my house to this office almost every day, and it's bumpy. It's very bumpy. So I appreciate just the simple thing as paving is actually quite an inducement to actually getting out and cycling. And I do appreciate too that comment, because of course we have in these conversations we kind of get focused on wide issue. In fact, we're quite focused on cycling, but of course, I really appreciate the people coming speaking to the accessibility, to the pedestrian aspects of this. It's all part of a big piece. And of course, we have all kinds of other funny things like deer management and other things that we sort of get into our budgets and providing water supplies and so forth. So that's our job, is to look at this in the big picture. But this is a really important step forward in my mind. And I have some thoughts about how we can, if there's some specific things that want to get added in. I do think that the report could benefit personally with a couple of additions. I do think that the destination parking question should be part of this. I think that's a really critical aspect of making a place viable for biking is that end infrastructure. And actually my other comments on those were quite adequately answered. I think as long as we're moving things forward, the things that I thought should maybe be added in there, like the Cadborough Bay, I heard that just requires a bit more time and effort. We can't treat it as a quick win because we may need some infrastructure changes. I get that. What I'm hearing is those are still in the sort of next couple of years pipeline, not a decade from now pipeline. So that's to my mind meets the requirements for where I sat at. And if I can read my own writing here, I'll have a quick look. Oh, the other question I was going to ask was, this has come up a number of times prior to this meeting, as I've heard at least once or twice here. Those, the maze gates, I guess my observation is here is there's advantages to being early and advantages to being late. One of the things that's really changed in the last 5 years has been this huge uptick in e-bikes, which changes the design dynamic quite dramatically because they're operating at different speeds with different weights, different handling capacity. And cargo bikes as a part of that phenomenon as well. And those maze gates really interfere with the ability to cycle on what we would normally consider to be routes. So is that something that we could consider perhaps, would that be appropriate to perhaps add in as a ask to include the consideration of changes to those maze gates as part of our active transportation strategy? Or is that work undergoing already as part of this discussion? There's a long-winded comment before a question.
Yeah. No, I think that would be an appropriate direction to give to the consultant if there's a willingness basically to look at are maze gates the done thing anymore, or should we be removing them?
Great. Thank you very much for that. So we have in front, and we have to get to some other business tonight as well, so I want to make sure I kind of manage this as efficiently as possible. I heard some desire to change some wording on the one item. So perhaps I'm just going to try and walk us through some of these motions and see if we can get to consensus on them. And I had one thought on the North Henderson portion of things, because though this is again, we're having a meeting on discussion around a policy document essentially and some direction to council, not a decision-making factor tonight. So perhaps there's some things that we can maybe manage on that front going forward. And I would just like to point out that by sort of endorsing this in whatever format that kind of language looks like, I do want to point out that doesn't sort of give direction to make some of these changes over time. And so if there's desire for additional consultation and so forth, there's things to consider. But I think we have to feel comfortable with the whole of this sort of architecture to move it forward. And I think that does give some weight to some of these other changes that are being considered. So that being said, we have a number of recommendations, and certainly the first one is always the easiest, which is a motion to receive the report. So I get a motion to receive, moved and seconded, thank you. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? It's always, the first one's always unanimous. We get to receive the report. And then we move on, that the recommendation here is that refresh active transportation be endorsed as presented or endorsed as amended. Councillor Appleton, both you and Councillor Smart had indicated, but I think perhaps you can try some modified wording to that. And then I think we should add, I think there's a few comments I've heard here to add some additional things to that. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So what I think that I heard was that we could change the titling, or to at least change the recommendation to refer to the consultant's report specifically. So what I understood is that we could pass a recommendation, so move that the recommendation, or move that the review of the Oak Bay active transportation strategy be endorsed as amended as follows.
Was that sufficient for staff?
Sorry, there was a lot of nonverbal communication between myself and the CAO. Yes, that is sufficient for staff.
Do we have the tools to get that up on screen, just so we're not, I think it's very straightforward, but just so we're all kind of clear about what it is that the slight change, is a very slight change in wording, but I think it's
Essentially, the
helpfully
crux of it, Your Worship, is just to refer to, after my, Mr. Rennick's comments, that it would be acceptable to refer directly to the consultant's report and the title of the consultant's report, to avoid confusion with any revision to the original 2011 report.
We'd strike the, yeah.
And just so again, Your Worship, I was proposing that the review of the Oak Bay active transportation strategy be endorsed as amended as follows, because I would have amendments to that.
Endorsed as amended, yeah. Perfect. So that's moved, and we'll deal with the as follows separately, just so we can just deal with them one by one. Is there a seconder for that wording? Moved and seconded, so that's live. Before I go too far, we are in a slightly less formal format here. Is everybody okay with that language? So that we're a bit clearer on what we're doing? We don't need the 2011 because it'll encompass all changes. Sorry, questions from the gallery for those at home can't hear that. So we have that, so that's the wording. So thank you for that. So can we just get to, maybe just go around the table here, but Councillor Appleton, you have the floor. Were there some specific things you would like to see as amended?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I would propose an amendment that detailed designs and network planning use AAA design as a default.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Moved and seconded?
Thank you, Your Worship. So as per earlier question to Mr. Rennick, Mr. Rennick is talking about staff's approach, and I can be corrected. Perspective of approaching the design neighborhood bikeway style, or with a reflective of Oak Bay's particular types of roads, if we will, and that AAA design would be presented as an option when a detailed design came forward. So it being sort of a default of having and I mean, we can say it's essentially a less expensive option, because I think that's just the truth. So there's a baseline option and the AAA option. I would like to see us move forward with the AAA as a default, and then potentially have other options on top of that given individual circumstances. But I would like to see us entertain AAA as a default, with the understanding that that could potentially be a more costly or involved option. So just to recognize that I recognize that component.
Sure, and I always just like going to staff when we have these kind of motions, just to make sure that because what I heard originally was that the AAA is difficult in many situations, but that those options would be included. Just trying to get a sense of how this changes the detailed design work coming forward. Mr. Rennick?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Essentially, the approach that I had suggested was that, as Councillor Appleton noted, we would bring the most efficient, workable, cheap, if you want to use that term, design, and then present, if you were to do AAA, here would be the trade-offs, here would be the additional costs. I believe the amended motion would be framing that the other way around, where the option that would be presented would be AAA, and then we would say, or there's opportunities if you want to spend a little less, or save some parking spaces, or save some trees, as the case may be. I think it's providing the same information, it's just framing it in a different way.
Is that clarification? Is that enough, Councillor Smart? Did you want to add anything to as a seconder? No? Okay. Any other discussion on this motion? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Do you mind a question to?
No, questions are always in order.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Rennick. Thank you, Mr. Rennick. And you had made a brief reference to environmental impacts, potentially trees and green space. I just wanted to know, so as part of an ultimate decision on design, that would be something that would be considered in your presentation or summary or recommendation, that we would know clearly what the impacts were on green space and the environment. Thank you.
Rennick, go ahead.
Yes, that is correct. So for example, if you were to look at a road like McNeil Avenue that's only in some places 8.4 meters wide between the two curbs, if you're going to accommodate a AAA facility, you're going to have to widen the road. Widening the road means moving the sidewalks back into space that's currently boulevard, that's either grass, landscaping, or in some places, trees. And so when we talk about bringing options where we would present a AAA option or an option that works within the existing right-of-way, we would certainly outline for council all of those considerations. What can you achieve in the existing right-of-way? How wide would you have to go to get to AAA? What would be the implications of that?
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess my only, I think I'm supportive of this because I certainly want this to be one of the options in there. I guess I would always hope for, as a recommendation, as that sort of engineering does that sort of analysis and looks at the cost benefit analysis and comes forward with the best engineering advice they can give within those frameworks. Like if it's if it's 10 times the price for a small improvement in safety, or it's 5% more expensive to get a significant improvement, that those recommendations would come forward. I guess I just want to make my comfort on this is that analysis will still happen if this specific of what a default is at this stage of the design piece. Mr. Rennick?
Ultimately, presenting one option as the default is not taking away council's role of making decisions. We will always bring you the best advice that we can and all of the information. But ultimately, the choice of will this route be AAA, weighing all of the pros and cons and the costs, that is council's role.
Thank you for that. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor. And just a clarification so that I understand this fully, and perhaps it's another question for Mr. Rennick, but just also want to understand that as we're doing detailed designs for what is proposed here using a AAA design, that we are also designing to universal accessibility standards.
Mr. Rennick?
I believe it would be best to have that be a separate motion, or at least to modify the motion to also include the phrase universal accessible design, just so that we're very specific.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor right now to include the AAA as a default. Thank you for that. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. I don't want to give everything to you, Councillor Appleton, but if you have a couple of other suggestions on this, then we can do that, and if there's any other suggested additions.
I have a procedural question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just the next recommendation, staff recommendation, deals with proceeding to detailed design. There are two components included here. I'm wondering whether you might be willing to sever those two components.
Oh, I'm happy to deal with that when we get there. Right now, we're going to deal with the motion that's right on the floor with us, which is the, yeah, so it's a separate motion. Yep, no problem. Anything else you want to add to this motion? Okay. Was there any other suggestions for additions to the active transportation strategy wording here, as amended as follows? I'm going to suggest that we add language along the lines of that the strategy include covered bike parking options for destination locations, so that the active transportation strategy includes parking as well as the transportation pieces, so that when it comes back to us, that they can bring back some options for destination parking. I'd rather that member of council move, I guess I can move it in an informal format that we're in here.
I would so move, your worship. I think
Thank you.
it says covered there, but I think it would be
Well, you know what, just leave bike parking.
Destinations,
destination bike parking.
destination bike facilities.
Sure.
If I may, the term the province uses is end of trip facilities.
Okay. End of trip. Bike facilities? Okay, I think so the wording would then be that the strategy include end of trip facilities. Okay. Is that sufficient, Councillor Appleton?
Yes, thank you, your worship.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded. Is there any discussion on that? Okay. Then I'm going to call the question to add the inclusion of vendor trip facilities as part of the active transportation strategy. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Is there anything else that people wish to add to the strategy before we go? I'll go over this side. Councillor Smart and then Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, I'd like to add just to clarify if I'm understanding this correct. The third project, the Oak Bay Ave commuter route, it indicates Fort Street to St. David, half of which is in City of Victoria, and it indicates protected bike lanes. Do we know, I guess my question, just before I make this suggestion, do we know that the City of Victoria is going ahead with protected bike lanes on their portion? Is that why that suggestion was made?
Mr. Rennick?
I believe it's in their plans, but I don't know that we have confirmation of a timeline for it. We could certainly look into that.
Mr. Smart?
Yeah, so I would like to include in the motion that the design for the Oak Bay Ave commuter route involve public consultation.
Can I just suggest, since it's almost certain to be part of our village area plan, that it's probably not, it's a bit redundant at this point because that's going to have a lot of public input as part of that design. But I'll leave it to you as well.
Yeah, potentially. I guess I see this in writing as being so specific to dictate protected bike lanes, and I guess I just see this as something the public might have great concerns over, especially the business community and losing parking spaces. And but maybe if I'm the only one that shares those concerns, I'm not sure.
Sure, I'll just share in the body of the document, as I recall, there's very specific reference to the village area planning to inform that design. So in the body of the document, it does refer to that, but you're right, the bullet points don't. So if you feel this clarifies, then that's beneficial. If the committee doesn't feel it's necessary, then we won't add it. But I'll leave it to you as to whether you think it's helpful to have it a bit more clear.
Knowing that that's in the rest of the document, if it's not of concern to anybody else at the table, I'm fine leaving it out.
Well, the motion's made. I'll leave it now without. So we've had a bit of a conversation here before, looking for a seconder. But is there a seconder for it, based on that, Councillor Patterson? So we can deal with the motion. So I think it has some merit, and we can think. Councillor Patterson, do you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you. And I think this gets closer to what I was wanting by designing to universal accessibility standards, because on commuter routes, I think that it's really important that we take into consideration the interface with the public transportation systems, because if you're putting in protected bike lanes and the getting on and off of public transportation and accessing bus shelters is a very important interface with the active transportation strategy. So I think this would essentially do the same thing, ensure that on the commuter routes that we involve the public in consultation on this, because my experience is many of the extensions of bike routes throughout the CRD have in fact diminished the safety of public transit at the same time that the service has been also decreasing.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Appleton, and then Watson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not opposed to this per se. I was actually hoping that and it was intending to bring forward some additional motions, additional to what's here about public consultation. Public consultation is not specifically provided for here. I've heard what the public's had to say. I think there definitely is a lot of value in looking at the 2011 plan, 2023 revised components, and taking it back out to the public. So I would like to see us engage in a public engagement process around the active transportation plan more generally. I'm not sure that would satisfy, the mover of the motion as far as like this, that I'm sure Oak Bay Avenue would be a key point of discussion, but that might not be necessarily adequate. But I would like to see a broad program of public consultation be included as well, and would include that later on in any case, but I don't know whether that influences this particular component.
Councillor Appleton, Councillor Watson, then Green.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just following up on that comment about the motion, I'm not sure we need it, because if we need it, then we need to have a whole bunch of other separate motions around other designs, including, for example, the Cabra Bay corridor, where we're going to have some of exactly the same issues, or how we deal with eventually Foul Bay. So I just think it's one of those higher level things that we should be taking for granted in how we roll out any element of this plan going forward where there's major work required. So I'm not so sure, unless we reframed this as something a bit broader and comprehensive, that I would put this in as a motion or support it.
Councillor Watson, Councillor Green.
I'm leaning towards supporting the motion, and largely because we talked about the bollards at a meeting on Oak Bay Avenue that has a real impact on the Business Improvement Association, and that is all the members of our local small businesses on Oak Bay Avenue who are impacted at the moment and are concerned about our local economy. So I think this is an important motion in the sense that it would include consultation and dialogue with key stakeholders like the BIA and their members, all of whom are on Oak Bay Avenue as small businesses. I think that's an important conversation. So I'm leaning towards supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll speak since I haven't. I'm not going to support the motion, not because I don't want consultation. I think just procedurally, if we pull one specific corridor out and have a motion on this for consultation, it then almost necessitates additional motions for every area that we want to have consultation. I heard that as we do the detailed design, we'll have those options in terms of what we're doing. And this one specifically because we are doing a village area plan, and transportation, parking, bike parking, all those things are going to be an integral part of making our village successful in the long run, and so it'll have a significant amount of public consultation. So I totally support the intent of this motion. I just don't think it's the right motion at this point. I think what I heard was that maybe a motion arising out of this that might give us a bit more direction for the entire plan to get some more public consultation. I think that's the right level of conversation that we should be having the consultation for this strategy, not for the specific designs. Councillor Smart.
Thank you. I wonder if you might be amenable to hearing everyone talk around the table, maybe more specifically, it should read that the design for the Oak Bay Avenue commuter route to be integrated with the village planning process. That might strike more the right note, because I do hear what you're saying. If the seconder might be open to that
I think
modification.
I'm going to try and get away from modifying motions as we're still having conversations. I think let's deal with this. If there's a need that people feel to add another motion if this fails, or if it succeeds, then it'll be dealt with and we can move on. So we've had a discussion. Is there any other discussion before we call the question on this motion? Seeing none. All those in favor? And those opposed? I have Councillor Watson, Appleton, and myself opposed. That motion fails. Councillor Smart, you still had the floor there. I might suggest that if the consultation pieces, we're dealing with the strategy as a whole here, right now the motion is to amend the transportation strategy itself. So if there's, I think, maybe some broader approaches, those would be better dealt with as a separate motion. But is there anything else you wish to see added or changed within the strategy itself?
Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Rennick. I guess just a question about the maps containing all of Oak Bay. I'm anticipating that just a general comment in the meeting is enough, and I wouldn't need to put a separate motion forward around expanding the maps to include the full boundary.
We had nods in the.
Yes, I would agree that you don't need to make a motion for that.
And similarly, I guess my question is, would it be helpful to put forward a motion just indicating to examine key intersections? Because we had a couple important intersections come up in this, or has that discussion been sort of sufficient at this point?
Mr. Rennick?
I also feel that the intersection designs are implicit to the broader designs. I don't think you need a separate motion for that.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other suggested change amendments to the to this motion, which is review of the active transportation strategy, be endorsed with these two amendments currently? Is there any other amendments before I call the question? My phone just dinged, and usually it's Ms. Williams that's stinging me on these things, so give me a second here. Yeah, it's already, yes. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just a point of clarification on that, then. The detailed designs and network planning using the AAA design will include input from persons with disabilities.
Sorry, was that a suggested amendment? Is that what you're, or addition of
Just
sorry.
like clarification, if that would be the intent of staff to actually, because that was something that was not really taken into consideration in the 2011 report, and I think it's an important component of it if we're doing a AAA design, that input is achieved somehow, and I'm not sure when it comes into this plan.
So we have a strategy document here, Mr. Rennick. Those two questions were sort of discussed tonight, right? Both the sidewalk master plan and the accessibility requirements that are going forward. Are those dealt with at the design phase of this, or where were those actually? Is there benefit, I guess, of anything being added at this point within the strategy to reference that?
That's a difficult question to answer. Certainly the intent of all ages and abilities is that they are intended to be, as the name suggests, intended for all ages and abilities. Certainly there are options that council could direct. Designs could be sent through the accessibility committee. That could form part of council's sign off on any particular project. I think that might be the most efficient way to achieve what Councillor Patterson is suggesting.
Councillor Patterson?
So then, just a clarification, does AAA include things like scooters?
Mr. Rennick?
I believe that the province's definition of active transportation does include mobility scooters, yes. It's basically anything other than a car. Even horses, although I don't think we're building any horse trails, but maybe one day.
We have to increase our cleaning budget if that's the... Okay. I don't see any other hands on changes, so this motion is... Oh, Mr. Robertson.
Just listening to the discussion around the, whatever you call them, the gates, the maze gates, do you want to add that as a specific amendment as well to be reviewed by the consultant included in the report?
Wish to see. I raised it as a point that I thought deserving of review. Yeah. Getting yeses, so perhaps a motion to include review of maze gates in the district as well.
I would so move, Your Worship.
Moved and seconded, thank you. Maze gates be reviewed. I think it's probably sufficient, just that. I have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Watson?
Just a question. I wondered how many, I know of a few, but how does anybody know off the top, staff, how many of those we actually have right now throughout the municipality?
Mr. Rennick?
I don't have an exhaustive count. I can think of at least a half a dozen of them off the top of my head. A lot on the Bowker Creek walkway, some of them on the Haltane neighborhood walkway. They do kind of crop up all over the place.
They do. Councillor Watson, sorry. Okay, the motion's on the floor to include that. Any other discussion? Thank you for that, Mr. Robertson. I had in my notes and I didn't star it, so I didn't bring it up. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. So we now have with these amendments, we have this motion. Yes. No, we don't usually take additional comments from the audience at this point. We're pretty informal, but not quite that informal in these bodies. All right, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you for that. So we look forward to those slight changes into the revised strategy. We have other pieces of this recommendations here, which is the next one is, and you asked Councillor Appleton, the next one is the staff proceed with detailed designs of the Henderson Road and the Haltane Estevan neighborhood bikeway. I'm happy to separate those two. Procedurally, that's straightforward enough. So perhaps since if someone just moves it, I'll just separate the two as a procedural piece. You'll move the recommendation motion is moved and seconded. So I'll separate them, Councillor Appleton. You can speak to either one of those at this point if you wish, and you ask me to separate them.
Thank you, Your Worship. So then I would move that we would still need a motion to direct staff to proceed with one or the other, correct?
The motion to move forward with both is on the table, so we'll deal with each of them separately. I'll just separate the two pieces. So if you want to change something, I think we'll deal with Henderson Road first then, if there's any changes that people.
Okay, well, I thank you, Your Worship. I guess I would ask, you to consider how you want to handle this. But the reason that I ask that they be separated is that I think that we should proceed forward with one, but not one of the others, but substitute another design from the review in its place. So I'm not sure how you want to handle that. Whether we need to vote on both and agree or defeat on both, but I would like to, the reason I asked for them to be separated is because I think one should go forward, but I would like to see a replacement for the other.
Just in the interest of time and sanity, why don't we just explain what you want to do, and then I can deal with the procedure to get there.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I think that there is good support, and I think that I would like to see the Haltane Estevan neighborhood bikeway go forward. I would like to see us be significantly more ambitious with what we take on in the near term. And I would rather than use the Henderson Road neighborhood bikeway as the primary north-south component in that part of the district, I would like to see us advance the Cadborough Bay separated bike lane as also laid out in recommendations in the 2023 report, and use that as an alternative.
Okay, I think what I'll do is I think procedurally here, so we can consider the whole together. I'll treat this. I can treat it as either as an amendment to the motion, which may be the simplest, and I can just deal with them both one by one. Probably the simplest way of doing this. So after the end, the Haltane Estevan neighborhood bikeway, the amendment would add the Cadborough Bay.
In the report, it's referred to as the Cadborough Bay Road commuter route for reference. It's referenced as 4.3A in the report, Your Worship.
Bed and breakfast board. Okay. So I think since I'm separating them, I'll just treat all three separately. But I think for interest of managing this conversation, we can have this discussion around what I think probably choosing two of three is the right thing to do, because we're looking for short, quick, well, I think as quick as we can, changes on these pieces. So that being said, those are the sort of the three options in front of us. Councillor Appleton, you already sort of motivated a bit on this in your comments, but you're welcome to continue if you have anything else you wish to add.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. So I've been fairly adamant the whole time that I've been talking about this subject that the basic network is the goal that we should achieve. Cadborough Bay is a more intensive project. It is a more significant project, but it is a separated bike lane project. It acts as that north-south corridor in the northern part of our community. It directly services Willows Elementary and also moves through commercial centers and moves people north to south through the community. It is going to be a more detailed and more intensive design to come up with. I'd like to get us started on it immediately, and it also has the advantage to key in with some of the existing bike infrastructure in Oak Bay that already exists, and also through to the 4th Street lane, which is currently under construction in Victoria. So in terms of connectivity and impact and safety, this I think is the project that we should be targeting right now. Thank you.
Thank you. I got a voice from our Deputy Director of Corporate Services from up in the Shuswap right now. As he just reminding me, I don't think we got a seconder for this amendment to include the Cadborough Bay Road, which it's good motivation, but I think we need to get a seconder to see if that's actually being added, moved and seconded. I wasn't doubting that we get a seconder for it, so thank you for the motivation. This is what happens when the meetings go towards 10 o'clock at night, is we end up with procedural hiccups. All right, so we have here in front of us, I would suggest 3, and perhaps I'll just go around the table. Do people have, in terms of choosing the 3 there, are there any feelings on this? If not, I'm going to call them one by one. I guess ultimately council could choose 3, but realistically, maybe I'll ask the question of staff, how realistic is it to have 3 quick wins in this scenario, Mr. Rennick?
We have the funding to advance design on 3 projects at once. I would hesitate to describe the Cadborough Bay project as a quick win. I would agree with Councillor Appleton's characterization that it's a larger and more complicated project. That could certainly delay when it's ready to go to grant funding. But it's certainly possible for us to design 3 projects in parallel. I believe Director Robertson wants to follow on to that.
Mr. Robertson actually has the staff responsibility, so Mr. Robertson?
Yes, I'm concerned with taking on being too ambitious and putting forward something that I know we're going to have a challenge meeting. We've been able to add 2 staff in the last month, and so we're getting it up to speed. But we have another one coming on next week. But we're still 2 that we're still having to go out again and search for. And we do have our largest project coming online here in the fall. And we're working on master plans, 5-year plans for sewer, drain, water, and all these things to consider. So I just want to be mindful of how much it'll take to pull these off from staff standpoint. I think, as we discussed it, I thought 2 is something that we could manage, but I'd be concerned about going that far.
A natural follow-up question to that, because in the conversation earlier, it was quick wins, but that design work was going to be going on for, for this work with the intention of rolling these out over the next 4 to 5 years, 4 years really. So what does that mean if one of these isn't approved? Does it still go through a design process, but it's just bumped down the list a little bit, or where does that sit?
Part of our 5-year plan that we were asked to bring forward in the upcoming budget cycle is, if we accelerated the plan into 5 years, what funding would be required to do that. So we'll have a better idea by that time what it would take from a financial standpoint and also from a staff resources standpoint.
Thank you for that. So quickly around the table here, I think probably just good to get, this point we're sort of choosing based on the information in the report and our feeling from the conversation where we want to tackle in the quick win. So Councillor, I'll go around the table here. Councillor Green.
Thanks very much. I appreciate Councillor Appleton's intent here, but staff obviously chose these 2 projects for a reason, and that is that they could be expedited. If we change that and add either a third or switch out one for Cadbury Bay Road, which is extensive, we're back to the same issue that Oak Bay sometimes is criticized for, and that is raising expectations of the public and then not following through in a timely fashion. So I would rather stick with the recommendations from staff, and I appreciate what Mr. Robertson said. So I'm unable to support this particular motion. I would be happy to support the motion if it remained unchanged. Thank you.
Watson?
Thank you, Mayor, and I will just sort of ditto what I just heard from Councillor Green. I think, yes, that the Cadbury Bay commuter route is an important project, but it is not a quick win, and I think we do need some quick wins. I also think that the Henderson Road neighbourhood bikeway is a very good central north-south route that we should be supporting. Cadbury Bay is quite far east. Foul Bay is, of course, as far as west we can go, and I think that it, for Oak Bay to have a continuous route like that, given that it is a quick win and fairly simple to do, is really an important step forward. So I would not be supporting switching out the Henderson Road bikeway, neighbourhood bikeway project for a more ambitious project at this time.
Councillor Appleton, you've already had a say. Do you want to add anything else, or are you good with where you're at? Go ahead.
Thank you, Worship. I'll be brief. I just think the Cadbury Bay Lane takes advantage of the currently underway construction on the Victoria side, and it specifically accesses Willows Elementary, which has been raised repeatedly as an issue for access by parents and families going to that school. None of the roads around it are safe enough to really let a child ride independently to that school, and it's been raised multiple times in this council chamber about that specific area, and I want to see that resolved. That is an area that is ripe for conflict, and we hear repeatedly about congestion for vehicles around Willows Elementary. The congestion for vehicles happens at drop-off and pickup from people who are driving their kids because it's not safe enough to let them ride independently. So I just think it's an extremely important project. It's not a quick win. It is an essential project that we should be looking at now. That's why it was prioritized in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. It's funny because I actually had drafted a motion to include this section in that piece, but it was also sort of predicated on the idea that we could do at least extend the bike lanes that far to the school or to Estevan with minimal pieces, because the bigger question, part of my question earlier was sort of, can we do interim pieces to some of these things? I would love to see us look at something that we can do quickly to extend that, but I hear what's being said about the complexity of making that a proper separated to the final design portion of it as being problematic. So I'm actually would love to see that come back very quickly as a piece, but I think I'm still, especially given the benefits of having something that connects from Elgin through all the way up to North Oak Bay on a route that a lot of people ride now without, because it's actually a fairly safe route, but it's bound by all kinds of sort of bad things like those gates and some of the sort of pinch points that don't work well. So I'm, generally speaking, I think I'm inclined to stick with the quick wins being actual quick wins, and those other detailed designs coming back fairly quickly, or looking at some interim options if that's possible. Councillor Smart?
Yeah, thank you. I will be supporting this. It is a safe route to school solution, and it's not just for Willows, it's for Oak Bay High. It's even for Monterey, because the majority of English middle school kids have to travel all the way from Uplands down to Monterey. This will be much more impactful. Will it be a little bit harder? Yes, but will it push us into the place we need to be and making up for lost time and doing something amazingly impactful for our community? And yeah, I'll definitely be supporting it.
Councillor Patterson?
Yes, I won't support the change. I think that what the recommendation made by staff was a responsible, it was a responsible way of moving some of the objectives forward quickly. which is what we instructed them to do. I think the Cadborough project is much more complex. Perhaps when we have additional staff that are added and we're confident that we have the number of personnel involved to carry this forward in a meaningful way, I would be more comfortable at postponing it till we have that. And we also have the issue of the site of the former Oak Bay Lodge that is still vacant, and we have no idea of what's going to happen there, but I expect that will also change transportation somewhat in that corridor also. So I won't support the change. I certainly understand why Councillor Appleton brought it forward, and I agree with his comments, and it is important, but I just don't think that we should try to promise expectations that we don't know that we can meet because we just don't have the resources available. So I'd rather stick with what we can do and achieve success.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. So what's on the floor right now is the amendment to add the Cadborough Bay Road commuter route. If this is successful, then we'll look at taking off one of the other two. If it's not, then we will go back to the original two on this one. So I think I've heard a sense of where this is going, but we'll call the question. So on the amendment to add the Cadborough Bay commuter route to the quick wins column, all those in favor? And then those opposed? Councillor Green, Watson, Murdoch, Patterson opposed. That does not get added in. We're back to the first two, which is the two quick wins. Any other discussion on that motion? Oh, well, you wanted to separate it? I said I would separate them, so I will continue that. So I'll deal with the Henderson Road Neighborhood Bikeway first. Sorry, the Henderson Road Neighborhood Bikeway, not Bakeway, Bikeway first. So we'll call the question on the Henderson Road. Oh, go ahead, Councillor Watson, sorry.
I would like to move an amendment to the motion for the Henderson Road Neighborhood Bikeway, if I could. And the amendment would be that the detailed design and forward work include the portion of the existing temporary bike lane to make it a permanent 724 bike lane, because it is the northern end of this route. So
I'm just going to not have that as an amendment to this. I guess my suggestion on this one, just because it was the only thing that was flagged by, and we can certainly deal with it. I think, given this is a strategy piece, not this piece, and this doesn't directly link, because that really links with the Fowl Bay Road. But I'm just going to share with you. So Councillor Braithwaite did indicate the only thing she had a comment on this report was that because this report is, that portion of the report is in the recommendations as being done, it forms part of the direction from the council, but her only ask was that she thought there should be some discussion about what consultation should take place on that one change. And so I might ask that we just consider that piece as a motion coming out of, when it comes to council, and Councillor Braithwaite is here, that we can consider that changes, because it doesn't actually require any design work. It's just a change. And we've already dealt with it once at council, so it's difficult at a committee to then make a recommendation that overrides just a pre-existing council decision. I'd rather it happen at council if you're amenable to that.
yes, thank you. I didn't understand that. Had Councillor Braithwaite left instructions with you? If you could just clarify that again.
Meeting, and that was the only thing that she had flagged, was that she wanted to have that conversation about the consultation for that change. And I think that's out of respect. I think I'd like to do it that way, and it's not directly related to the Henderson piece. So I think we can do it at that level, and then it's a council-to-council decision-making piece.
All right, I'll accept that as long as we don't lose it.
No, so when it comes to council, I think that's the appropriate place to raise it. So not needing a second.
I withdraw the motion to amend.
Thank you. So we have the motion for the Henderson. So to the main motion appears the first section, which is the staff proceed with detailed design of the Henderson Road Neighborhood Bikeway. Full stop. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will support this motion as an alternative to the earlier component, but I would just make the point of pointing out to council and I guess to the public that this is an alternative route and should not be considered as removing Cadborough Bay from the conversation. This is a potential north-south avenue, but Cadborough Bay should still be, in my view, a priority project, notwithstanding the moving forward on design for this component.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other discussion, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. And the second part of this motion, that the halting Estevan neighborhood bikeway be the second of the quick wins identified. Moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion on this? Looking forward to that change at the intersection, I can tell you that. And at Estevan. Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Yes, I just did want to make the comment that with these two projects together, we actually do have we would have a neighborhood network that actually did take us to Willow School across Estevan Avenue and then safely down Musgrave. So I think that that the two in combination do address to some extent our concerns about bike transportation to Willows.
Thank you. I do want to just reiterate what Councillor Appleton said. I had it in my list as a priority, and I took it off because I think I heard the complexities of it, and I do want a couple of quick wins on these ones. The detailed design of the two that are here are practical and reasonably straightforward, but I echo that. I think that it does help, but I think we do have to address the Cadborough Bay one sooner rather than later. Anyway, we're back on this main motion, which is the halting Estevan neighborhood bikeway. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? I do need a motion to extend the meeting. We're going to no later than 10:30, please.
Move to extend the meeting until 10:30.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. This has to be unanimous. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Some pretty hesitant hands going up, but we do want to get through this. There's a few important things to still deal with after this as well. And then the last recommendation here is to provide an implementation plan for this. Mr. Rennick, just based on the changes that we've made here, does that require any changes, or can we still make this motion as it stands?
Thank you for passing the mic to me, Mr. Mayor. I've heard a lot of questions around the table around consultation, and I might suggest modifying this motion to incorporate some sort of consultation when coming back with the implementation plan. Whether staff is directed to consult prior to coming back to the implementation plan, or whether council wants to direct public consultation following the development of the implementation plan. But we feel that it would be in order to modify this motion to include the consultation piece.
Would it be in order to be something as simple as provide an implementation plan and consultation plan for the, or do you want something a bit more detailed on that? It feels strange having this conversation with staff in some ways. I just want to make sure the wording makes sense. That it gives you something tangible to bring back to council, if that's the will. I'm going to go to Ms. Williams and then back to you, Councillor Smart.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the only piece that's missing there for staff is, would council prefer the consultation be done before the implementation plan is created, or create the implementation plan, bring that to council with some consultation options, so it'll be post-development?
Thank you for that clarification. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that the wording could be that staff provide an implementation plan and subsequent public consultation, because I feel like the more we can have for people to speak to, it will be a more thorough public consultation.
I'll take it as a motion. And subsequent, moved and seconded. I've got to say, well, I'll take it as a seconder, and you have a hand up. Councillor Watson, go ahead.
Yes, just a comment about the motion as that we're amending. We did have a discussion in recommendation 1 about what we were actually referring to, which is no longer the 2023 active transportation strategy. So we should probably amend motion recommendation 3 so that we have similar language for what it is we're actually bringing the implementation plan back on.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that, Councillor Watson. My first blush is you were right, but I think it does actually, when it comes back as a implementation plan, it'll be the refreshed active transportation strategy. So it will be the refreshed version at that point. I think that's no.
No, it won't be. I believe the cleanest would probably be that staff provide an implementation plan and undertake subsequent consultation for the implementation of the active transportation strategy and delete the 2023. I realize I said implementation twice.
Just for our clarification, total clarity, that includes the 2011, this is all those pieces together. Just so we're all making a decision here on the same information. Okay, good. I'm just going to take this as the original motion as amended. There's the mover and seconder amenable to this. Councillor Smart? Okay. Thank you for that, catching the wording. Any other discussion on that? Yes, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Should we add the word subsequent public consultation because it's not clear?
No, I think consultation is effective because it might include active transportation, or accessibility committee. It might be some other pieces in there as well that might inform some of that. So I think we're better to leave it as broad as possible.
Okay, just one other question. Will it only be by an online survey? Because I really think this requires, as one of the public members suggested, it requires meaningful conversation. Thank you.
Just for our clarification here, I took this as a consultation plan would come back to us that the council would approve, but because we have it's subsequent to the implementation. So is that
I believe that's understood. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
There is a suggestion that maybe we could slightly change the wording just to make that very clear, that staff provide an implementation plan and a subsequent. And Ms. Williams, I think, has it.
Ms. Williams?
Thank
Good
you.
suggestions will come from anywhere at this point so we can get through this as quickly as possible.
True. Thank you, Your
Except the
Worship.
public. I know it really stinks being the public in this situation.
I think if we were to reword it if we were to jointly reword it to that staff provide an implementation plan and options to undertake subsequent consultation for the plan, or for the implementation of the active transportation strategy.
I think that is good. Mover and seconder happy with that? Happy smiley faces all around. Okay, good. So, this is the main motion. Is there any discussion on this? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Is there anything else that we want to raise at this point before? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Could you please, Mayor, just provide more details on how the time constraints on Henderson and Cedar Hill Cross will come back to council? I just wanted to know how you're anticipating that discussion taking place, and will it be at the next council meeting next Monday?
Sure. So council had a motion arising to change the current state, so that was not successful. So at this point, usually it's 6 months to come back. My suggestion is, because we have this report coming back, and this is really kind of provided an endorsement of the plan, which includes that change, that when it comes back to council, which I believe is it next week this comes back, that one piece we just bring as a and I'll work on some mechanism there to do it, just a motion arising or some other type piece. I just wanted to give, I think it's important, that council looks at a council recommendation. It's very strange for a committee to recommend an overturn of a previous discussion, but also I think just out of courtesy, that was the one thing that Councilor Braithwaite indicated to me that she wanted to talk about, was just the consultation portion of that. So I think that's the how do we actually go about implementing that now that the plan is essentially endorsed. So that's how it'll be raised at the next meeting. And I'll try and make sure I find some smooth way of bringing that in at that conversation. But by all means, raise it if I've not flagged it in the process of that meeting. Sure. Okay. Okay. Anything else on this? Can we move on to the, I believe we're actually resolving out of committee of the whole, and back to council to deal with some procedural pieces? What's that? I did. I called the question on it. Yes. Did I call the question? Yes. Okay. See? Too late. So we're on to number 9.2, which is a motion to reconvene the council meeting. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We have still open to public input if people wish to. Ride safe. The sidewalk patio expansion program. So this is this report came to us before. Then this is now at the first, second, and third reading of the actual bylaw, implementing the recommendations that came out of the body. So just a series of motions here, and I will pause at after receipt. If there's anybody online that wishes to address council on this matter, please speak. Raise your hand now, because we're going to go through this as soon as the receipt is completed. I'll seek public input, and then we'll come back to this table. So, can I get a motion to receive? Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. I don't see hands from the public, and nor do I see a long list of people online that look like they're waiting for this item on the agenda. Can I get a move for first and second reading? Can you read out the whole amendment bylaw, if you don't mind?
Yes, Your Worship. I would move that Streets and Traffic Control Bylaw Amendment number 4841/2023 be read a first and second time.
Yes, thank
Go
you.
ahead, Councillor Patterson. I realized my microphone was off.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I just I've been doing around a lot of walking around, looking at this space, and certainly I think privatization of public space is always a matter of significant importance. But we just had such discussions on active transportation about trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and do environmentally friendly things. And yet, on this, we're including patio heaters that are in fact going to be producing emissions to fairly significant extent in one case. What I am wondering is, if the bylaw is passed tonight, what's the time frame for compliance by the vendors who have installed these patios to bring them into compliance with the bylaw?
Yeah, good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I can answer that question. So, yeah, applicants will be given until December the 31st of this year to submit their applications to the district for staff's review and consideration.
That's the submission date. When do they have to be compliant? Mr. Green? If you don't know the answer to that question right now, I'm not.
Don't. Don't know the answers to that question.
Well, we can bring it back for adoption if that's an important piece, but go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think that we can have that information brought forward, as long as I know that the plans must be submitted by December 31st, and then we will move forward from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion on first and second reading? All right, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? That carries. Can we do third reading as well?
Yeah, Your Worship. I would move that Streets and Traffic Control Bylaw Amendment number 4841/2023 be read a third time.
Keep bumping my microphone at the wrong time. That will come back to this. Was had first, second, third reading. It'll come back for adoption at a future meeting. 10.2, we have a DVP. This is a later addition to the agenda package for 1703 Monterey Avenue. Mr. Green, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, Mayor, I just wish to, I will be recusing on this matter for non-pecuniary interest. I'm in the area, the notice area for this application. And I'm not sure exactly what the procedure is on this, but it is the last order of business in the meeting. And if I recuse, I would not want to wait in the waiting room to adjourn the meeting, so I would like to request permission of council to leave.
I think we have one more sewer use charge bylaw for adoption, but I believe it's past the first 3 readings and there's no additional comments. So if you wish to leave at this point, that is totally acceptable, Councillor Patterson. But we will wait till you completely leave the room then before we deal with the matter. And just for the record, she's not just saying she's recusing herself to get out of the meeting early.
Sorry, through the chair, I've just had a response from my colleague, Mr. Ball, in relation to that question that I wasn't able to answer. So yeah, the intent was that applications would need to be submitted, approved by December 31st, or then they would need to be removed after that date.
Well, fair, but if they're, would they be fully compliant at the end of the year, or would they be just have to submit their plans at the end of the year?
Yeah, the intent would be that they would need to be in place by December 31st.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. And on the, we won't talk about it yet, but on the DVP, is, Mr. Green, are you introducing this, or is the fire chief?
I will introduce it on behalf
right,
of
you're the
staff,
applicant.
planning staff, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, but the district is in receipt of a development variance permit application that's been submitted by the Oak Bay Fire Department, and we're
Okay, stop talking now. We're going to wait
Okay.
for Councillor Patterson to leave. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Have a great evening. Okay, welcome, Mr. Green.
Thank you. Yeah, so I will speak initially on this application. So the district is in receipt of a development variance permit for the property located at 1703 Monterey Avenue, which is the Oak Bay Fire Hall. The applicant is the Oak Bay Fire Department, and they've submitted a development variance permit to vary the setback provisions for the general institutional use in order to construct a new temporary parking structure to store a new fire department ladder truck that is due to arrive by the end of the year. This application is before you in terms of seeking council direction to give notice of the application. And so if council gave notice this evening, staff would essentially send letters out tomorrow to all properties, owners and tenants within 50 metres of the property, and they would then bring the application back and the draft permits for council's consideration at a subsequent meeting, which is at this point planned for July the 31st. Happy to answer any questions. Obviously, the applicant is also here to answer any questions as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. I won't ask for additional comments from the fire chief unless we need some questions answered. I hope council's had a chance to have a look at this. There is obviously, if the council feels it meets the merits here, it will go out for notification. It'll come back to this body for consideration at this point. What's interesting, it's actually under the for public input, but we don't normally take public input at this stage. We usually do this thing. So this is actually not for public input. It's in the wrong section, but that's okay. We'll just move along since there's not a lot of people lined up to talk to it anyway. So at this point, council's discussion, if it meets sort of threshold, then it'll go up for public input, and then council will have to make a decision on this when it comes back. Any questions? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, just with regards to the site plan versus the aerial photograph, it appears on the site plan as though the structure is going to be located on a row of parking more to the north, but it obviously the aerial is not entirely to scale, so it appears that the structure is going to be on the row of parking to the south. And while this seems minor, there are a lot of concerns that the community has recently raised around safety in this parking lot. And so I just wanted to clarify that the location on the site plan is the accurate one, and I wonder just about clearly communicating going forward, where that stands. Might need to be clarified.
Sure, Mr. Green?
Yeah, so the proposed structure does straddle the property boundary and does encroach into essentially the dedicated highway. That being said, we did refer this application to colleagues in engineering and public works, and they've raised no concerns regarding the application in relation to its encroachment into that dedicated highway. And obviously, the fire department have looking at the best location for that structure, given the size of that ladder truck and the need for that fire truck to be close to the fire hall, be accessible for emergencies, and also the ability to reverse that large vehicle into a building as well.
Great, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, so just, I guess just to go back to my question, when we're looking at the page 9 of 16 of the report, we're seeing that this rather high structure is located on overlapping the more northern bank of parking. I just wonder if there were any concerns, I guess, about safety and sight lines and utilizing this parking lot. I guess I've just recently hearing the Girl Guides talk about near misses of small children getting hit in this parking lot. I'm concerned about a very high, large structure in that location, and I wish it was located in the more southern position as the aerial photographs show, because it would potentially locate less of those sightline concerns.
I hand this over to the chief. I was, in looking at the page 9 of 16 on the report, there's you can see the fire truck in scale coming in there. Perhaps you can just address whether or not consideration was given to moving that building further south, i.e. closer to the two buildings, if that was possible, given the nature of the truck access.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. We'd actually had quite a bit of consultation with police as well as members of the fire department in regards to where to locate it. This was deemed to be from a safety access and egress perspective for police and fire, the safest, most usable location for us. It does result in the loss of 5 of the police parking spots, which will end up having to make up the difference elsewhere within the parking, right? But that was deemed to be the most acceptable spot between both agencies.
You wish to clarify, Councillor Smart, or is that sufficient? Councillor Watson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I will just ask a follow-up question on the same line. When this vehicle is being moved in and out of this structure, are there flaggers, or like what's going on in the parking lot when the vehicle is moved to deal with potential safety considerations?
Chief?
So it's standard protocol for all of our heavy apparatus when they're backing up, that they have to have someone that's backing them up. So they're called a spotter. So there is always someone behind the vehicle that is spotting it to assist it going in reverse. So it is quite a safe practice relative to most other vehicles that you would see in and around that type of area.
Councillor Watson, anything else?
Yes, just one other question about, because of its situation and its height, if you could just comment, maybe Mr. Green or Fire Chief, on that and loss of sight lines because of the structure from a safety perspective.
I'm not sure to give that to.
Yeah, I can take that. So a sightline needs to be looked at in a couple of different ways. And one of the key aspects of the sightlines is the sightline impact to the Monterey St. Anne piece itself and the traffic and access egress, as opposed to sightline within the parking area. So it doesn't matter whether you've got something that's 12 feet or 19 feet that's in the parking area, the sightline is going to be impacted. But if you've got something that is out close to the roadway and it's in a prominent area where it's going to impact the sight lines of police and fire that are egressing and heading out onto Monterey, or cause a blind spot where our vehicle suddenly emerges, it can cause an even bigger safety issue as far as involving cars on the Monterey St. Anne piece.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess this is a question for the applicant. Do we have enough ownership over this structure that we have the ability to deal with the aesthetics of it? Can we paint it, wrap it, otherwise sort of take steps to sort of diminish its industrial massing, I guess, for want of a better word?
Chief?
Great question. And yes, we do have quite a bit of money that's available for site prep, and within the site prep funding, we would envision most likely having a wrap for the vehicle. So we've considered things like we've got a bunch of historical photographs of early generation firefighters for the department that we could put on the side, some other things like that, or we could also wrap it so it actually looks like a fire truck that's parked there. There's a variety of different things we could do, right? Or you could turn it into a building that's somewhat in keeping with the area. However, we've got quite a mix of stuff there. So I would suggest probably the historical piece or going with something that's a bit more creative. But yes, we do have the ability.
Just imagining faux Tudor attached, stapled to the side of it. Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, to the applicant. I just wondered if, and actually perhaps this is better directed to staff. I'm wondering what the consultation will be for this project, being that it doesn't just impact the residential neighbors. Will it include notification to the people that utilize the other buildings on the property?
Mr. Green?
Yeah, so Council's Land Use Procedure Bylaw and the Local Government Act requires the district to notify all property owners and tenants, so that would include any tenants of, for example, the Girl Guides, and the Scouts would also be notified as part of that formal notification process.
Good, thank you. All right, we have no motions on the floor at the moment, so let's just a motion to receive first. Move received, moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. So this is the move that notice be given. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any other discussion? This will have some public interest, obviously, as it rolls out. So this may come back with a significant amount of public feedback, or it may not. I do appreciate that this has to be considered within all of those contexts. So certainly very supportive of it going out for notification. All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. That moves us to item 11.1, which is a sewer use charge bylaw. Perhaps, Councillor Appleton, since you've done such a great job reading these, that you could just read the final adoption piece. Yes, yes, I will thank the chief for hanging in here. Thank you, Councillor Appleton. It was a long night to be sitting and waiting for your moment of glory. Thank you, Mr. Green, as well, for your... Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. So I would move that sewer user charge bylaw number 4392, amendment bylaw number 4843, 2023 be adopted.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Just a reminder, this is a mid-season change to address the significant uptick in the CRD's rate that they're charging us, so passing that on. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? That carries. New business. There's special counsel. Actually, I don't think we normally have new business, but if there is any, I'll take it. Nope. Motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unopposed? Oh, we almost made it to 2:22, but it just cut over to 2. Oh no, yeah, 2:23 is the cutoff time. Thank you so much, everyone.